I used to believe that family gatherings were supposed to be filled with laughter and joy, yet somehow, our last holiday dinner descended into chaos. Let me set the scene. It was Thanksgiving, and I was in charge of dessert, my mother's famous chocolate chip cookies being the star of the show. They were known far and wide among the family as the best cookies you could ever get your hands on, golden brown, gooey chocolate bits, and a hint of vanilla that danced on your palate like a warm hug. My brother-in-law, Keith, had always been a little difficult, often bringing an air of annoyance when he was around, but this year was different. He showed up late, barely acknowledged anyone, and then proceeded to complain about everything, how the turkey was dry, how nobody ever made the side dishes he liked, and the weather being freezing. I tried to shake off the irritation and focus on the food, but with each comment, my blood started to simmer a little more. When it finally came time for dessert, I served up the cookies, my heart racing as I encouraged everyone to dig in. But, of course, Keith couldn't help himself. He picked one up, looked at it with disdain, and said, "Of course, you made your mom's cookies again. Can't you ever try anything new?" My heart sank. I felt the anger rise within me, but I took a deep breath. Instead of reacting, I smiled tightly and offered him a cookie. This only seemed to amuse him. "You're really giving me a cookie? I'd expect nothing less from you. Guess you don't know how to handle criticism." His laughter rang out, a harsh note in the otherwise merry atmosphere. The hubbub of family chatter quieted for a moment, and I could feel all eyes on us. I held my ground, a mixture of disbelief and outrage bubbling beneath the surface. "Yeah, Keith, but at least I know how to bake," I shot back, half joking, half hurt. The family chuckled nervously, unsure whether to side with me or with their amusingly cynical cousin-in-law. As I stood there, cookie in hand, I felt this strange urge to actually give him what he wanted. I walked over to him, handed him the cookie with a challenging smile, and said, "Here, have a cookie, and maybe it'll sweeten your mood." To my surprise, he grabbed it, still smirking, and took a big bite. In that moment, I felt the tension shift, although I wasn't quite sure how. I'd fueled his rudeness, sure, but maybe I'd also diffused it just a little. The night went on, laughter returning, but my heart still felt bruised. I couldn't shake off the question, did I let him get away with his bad behavior, or did I actually stand up for myself? The next day, I found myself checking on a Reddit community, unsure of how to process my feelings. AITA for giving my Bill his favorite cookie when he was being rude? I typed into the post, desperate for validation, or at least some perspective. The comments flooded in, with people defending me and others pointing fingers at my choice of dessert diplomacy. It seemed I had become somewhat of an unwilling instigator in our family drama. As I read through the responses, I realized that navigating family dynamics is akin to walking a tightrope. You either fall flat or somehow manage to find your balance, and perhaps in that chaotic moment, I had done both. It wasn't just about the cookies, it was about setting boundaries, about standing my ground while still trying to maintain a sense of family cohesion. In the end, maybe I had learned that sometimes sweetness is a necessary ingredient, even when mixed with a little bitterness. As I settled back into my chair, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window, I found myself reflecting on the tiny whirlwind that had spun out of a simple cookie. It had all started innocently enough. My brother-in-law, Eric, was visiting with my sister, and I had baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies as a welcome gesture. Everyone was buzzing with laughter and chatter when Eric walked in, eyes lighting up at the sight of the cookie platter like a kid in a candy store. But the atmosphere shifted almost instantly when he made a snide comment about my choice of music playing softly in the background, mocking it as old people stuff. The laughter died, hovering awkwardly in the air, and I could feel the unspoken tension brewing around the room, a recipe for disaster. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to brush it off and carry on with the festivities, but another part of me felt stung, like a nagging bee buzzing in my ear that I couldn't swat away. As the minutes passed, more jabs followed, with Eric sarcastically commenting on everything from the decorations to the fact that I'd made too many cookies. Meanwhile, my sister wore a tight-lipped smile, clearly torn between her brother and her loyalty to me. I felt myself boiling under the surface, wanting to shout back, to remind him that we weren't in high school anymore, but I held my tongue, choosing instead to act with what I hoped was grace. Finally, with a heavy heart and a sigh, I picked up a cookie, carefully placed it on a napkin, and walked over to where Eric sat, acting as if I were making a friendly gesture. "Hey, Eric," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside, "I thought you might like one of these. The extra chocolate chips might make it sweeter than your comments today." I handed him the cookie, watching his surprise morph into a frown. His eyes narrowed for a second, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Was he going to take the bait or rise above it? To my astonishment, he took the cookie with a mixture of annoyance and confusion, a silent acknowledgement of the jab but also an acceptance of the olive branch. I watched as he took a hesitant bite, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes locked, and I wondered if this was the beginning of a truce or merely a temporary ceasefire. The room felt heavy but oddly charged. What I'd expected to be a cookie throwdown turned into some strange form of diplomacy that none of us had anticipated, as laughter crept back into the air, albeit a bit quieter, and conversation resumed. Yet that moment of shared, albeit tense, sweetness lingered between us. I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, my act of defiance combined with kindness had opened a door for communication, creating a space to address the larger issues lurking beneath the surface of our family gatherings. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table, the cookie platter almost empty, a culinary victory mixed with emotional exhaustion. Over the next few days, I shared the story with close friends, weaving the threads of our tangled family fabric into a narrative that resonated with them. Some saw me as courageous, while others deemed the act a silly misstep. I began to ponder the consequences of my actions. Did I empower Eric to be even ruder, or had I planted a seed for change? It sparked a conversation between my sister and me later when I told her how I felt about Eric's behavior. Her refreshingly candid response helped clear some of the air between us. She recognized his sarcasm was a cover for his own insecurities. Perhaps we were all just trying to cope with familial pressures in our ways, finding humor where we could, even if it meant hurling cookies into verbal sparring matches. Now, weeks later, the sun still pours in through the kitchen window, and every time I bake those cookies, I can't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. The cookies became a symbol of a balance I was learning to create, a reminder that sometimes, a lighthearted jab mixed with sweetness can lead to deeper conversations that needed addressing. Eric still has his moments of arrogance, but every once in a while, he'll comment about the cookies with a hint of respect in his tone, and that's enough for me. It feels like we're navigating towards some sort of truce, where laughter and playful jabs can coexist without becoming a battlefield. Each cookie baked now carries the weight of that experience, a reminder that within family, love is often wrapped in layers of confusion, but a sprinkle of sweetness can break through the hard shell. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when I found myself scrolling through my phone, the sun filtering through the golden leaves and casting a warm glow across my kitchen. I had just baked a fresh batch of my famous chocolate chip cookies, the smell wafting through the house like a cozy blanket. It was peaceful, but I couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Eric and our previous exchanges. The echo of his rude comments played in my mind, often mixed with his surprising candor since our cookie incident, which left me perplexed but hopeful. As I arranged those golden brown treats on the cooling rack, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. Eric and I had grown up laughing and fighting like siblings do, and my cookies had always been a point of pride for me in the family, something I could offer freely too. Both quell tensions and nurture connections. I remember my grandmother baking for us, how her treats were a salve to any quarrel, and it struck me then in that serene moment that perhaps I had inherited more than just her recipes. I had inherited a legacy of connection and communication, albeit a messy one through family feuds and the occasional burning oven mishap. Later that evening, after a long day, I found myself sitting on the back porch with my husband, Jake, discussing dinner plans when the distant sound of laughter caught my attention. It was Eric outside, tossing a football with my kids, the playful shouts blending with the soft rustling of leaves. A smile crept onto my face. There was something truly comforting about watching them, this chaotic ballet of family life unfolding in the fading light. And then, on a bit of a whim, I pulled out a plate of cookies and made my way to the yard, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my feet. As I approached, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. Had that moment of tension with Eric really changed anything? I set the plate down on the picnic table, and as if sensing my uncertainty, Jake leaned in and whispered, "You've got this," sending a tiny spark of confidence rippling through me. "Hey, fellas. Who wants cookies?" I called, trying to keep my tone light. Eric glanced over, his expression shifting from playful to curious, and for a moment, I wondered if I imagined the slight flicker of tension in his brow. "Those look amazing," he said, moving towards the cookies with genuine enthusiasm. "Thanks. They're basically a family tradition now, aren't they?" I quipped, watching for his reaction. The kids rushed in before he could respond, their small hands reaching for the biggest cookies, and a fractional relief washed over me. But then Eric caught my eye, and the playful respect I had been longing for flickered there as he took a cookie and laid a teasing jab in my direction. "Just don't burn them, all right?" he said with a half smile. I was taken off guard but decided to take it in stride. "Only if you promise to stop pretending you're better than everyone else in the kitchen," I shot back playfully, trying to mirror his tone. For a moment, silence hung heavy, and I braced myself for the fallout, the jovial sounds of my kids momentarily fading into the background. But then, to my amazement, Eric laughed, throwing his head back as if he just heard the world's best joke. "Fine, truce. For the cookies, I'll keep my arrogance in check," he replied, breaking into a grin. That exchange ignited something between us. The laughter seemed to bridge an unspoken divide, and I felt a weight lift. The moment was fleeting, but I knew in a way that I didn't fully understand yet, it was significant. As the evening grew darker, we sat outside. The kids played around us while we shared stories, our banter on the edge of sibling rivalry. I could see Eric relax, watch him drop the bravado just enough to be both earnest and playful. It felt as if every cookie was both a peace offering and a cornerstone, in a way I hadn't expected. And as I watched my family together, laughter mingling with words and playful jabs, something inside me settled. Maybe the path to understanding isn't straight, it's messy and wild, filled with cookies, black and white sibling disputes, and moments of clarity. I looked over at Eric, who from that moment on felt less like an opponent and more like family, in all its bittersweet chaos. It occurred to me then that sometimes a simple cookie really can change everything. It was a standard Friday night at our house, and the air was thick with the smell of freshly baked brownies and popcorn that I had just finished tossing in the air fryer. As the matriarch of my family and an ever-dedicated team mom for my daughter's softball squad, I thought I was hitting all the right notes. We had a sleepover planned for the girls after practice, a popular tradition that usually saw kids raiding our pantry for snacks until someone inevitably flops into a sugar coma. I had decided to swing for the fences this time, metaphorically speaking, with a spread that I thought would resonate: chips, soda, candy, you name it, everything I deemed fun and sleepover worthy. But as the girls poured in, all giggles and energy, my heart sank a little when I caught sight of one of the other moms standing by the snack table with a look of horror etched across her face. "Oh wow, I didn't think we were having a junk food party," she quipped with a tight smile, and it felt like the air had stopped circulating for a moment. You see, this particular mom, Lisa, prided herself on health. She lectured everyone during meetings about nutrition and how vital it was for our children, especially athletes, to have the right fuel. My mind started racing. Was I actually doing something wrong? The girls, oblivious to the tension brewing, dug into the snacks with glee, but I felt undeniably uneasy. I recalled when I was a kid, and sleepovers were a chaotic mix of soda and treats, with laughter drowned out only by the sound of a completely exhausted mom trying to keep the volume down. So why did it feel different now, like I was some villain for wanting my daughter to just enjoy the simplicity of junk food at a sleepover? As Lisa continued to sip on her herbal tea and lecture the other moms who didn't seem too worried, my anxiety turned into a defensive flare-up, and I could feel myself brimming with irritation. I finally blurted out something like, "It's just one night, and they deserve to have fun." But instantly regretted it when Lisa gave me that classic "I'm disappointed" look. The girls continued munching away, but I, unfortunately, was caught in a spiral of doubt, wondering if maybe I had put the ultimate parental foot wrong by not adhering to a strict playbook of health guidelines that I never signed up for. The tension in the air grew, and as the night wore on, I kept picturing the conversations that were taking place behind my back. Would they question if I was a good mom for allowing this? Did they think I didn't care about their health? As the girls shouted for comedies in the living room, my heart softened thinking about the laughter I had intended to cultivate with my choices. Moments passed, and they were bouncing off walls, connecting in joy. It ignited a flicker of comfort in my chest, until out of the blue, one of the girls, Emma, threw up after a particularly spirited burst of sugary energy. Chaos erupted. Lisa whipped around dramatically as if I were solely responsible for this culinary catastrophe, which only fueled the anxiety swirling within me. As I cleaned up the mess with 1,000 apologies spilling from my lips, I caught a glimpse of the other mother's stifling laughter, and I realized that my fears of being judged might have been blown way out of proportion. I discovered that Lisa's health obsession didn't resonate with a lot of the other moms who craved a little levity amidst the grind of competitive youth sports. By the end of the night, even Lisa was helping me, albeit reluctantly, while still casting judgmental glances, and I found solace in my daughters hugging me tightly. "That was fun, Mom," she said, And in that moment, I realized something vital. Parenting doesn't come with a defined manual, and sometimes you just need to let kids be kids, even if it means extra junk on a special night. I went to bed that night reflecting on how our choices shape our children's memories, and I fell asleep wondering if Lisa's comments would still sting in the morning. In the weeks that followed, I did have conversations with other parents that highlighted varying opinions about nutrition and fun, and while a few still sided with Lisa, many came to my defense, sharing that they, too, remember the sheer joy of junk food and chaos from their own childhoods. I found a cool balance moving forward, incorporating a mix of healthier snacks into the mix while preserving those nostalgic treats, and reminded myself that while we all want the best for our kids, fun and freedom have their own essential place in growing up. Maybe in the grand scheme of things, there's more than one way to be a good mom, one that includes a little more love and a little less judgment. Reflecting on that night, I felt an array of emotions swirling inside me, a blend of relief and residual tension that lingered long after the sleepover chaos had faded. The laughter and the smell of popcorn had long been replaced by the soft hush of the night, but the lingering whispers of doubt still echoed in my mind. Sure, I'd found a way to balance the snacks, but a part of me wondered if I had truly won any battle. Why was I so shaken by Lisa's opinion? I prided myself on being a laid-back mom, one who encouraged fun and creativity, yet here I was, caught up in a whirlwind of guilt over a plate piled high with nachos and gummy bears. Later that week, as I drove the girls to practice, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. My daughter Amelia, perched in the back seat with her friends, was laughing uncontrollably over some inside joke, her face lit up like a Christmas tree. That simple joy made my heart swell. In that moment, I realized I was the architect of those giggly memories. I had chosen to let them have that vibrant night, embracing the wild spirit of childhood. Yet, I couldn't help but glance up at the school in front of me, wondering if tomorrow it would be a soft reminder of Lisa's judgment or a celebration of my commitment to being a good mother. One evening, while sorting through Amelia's backpack, I stumbled upon a handwritten note. It was a small, folded piece of paper, and my curiosity pricked at me. I opened it, and there in her familiar scrawl was a thank you note that made my heart ache with sweetness. Thank you for the best sleepover ever, Mom. You let me have fun and brought smiles to my friends' faces. In that moment, everything came rushing back, the messy fun, the laughter, the absurdity of our midnight snack creations. My heart tightened, a wave of gratitude washed over me, reminding me how becoming a mother had transformed my perspective. As the weeks rolled on, something remarkable happened. I began embracing the idea that nurturing wasn't always about strictness, that it could coexist with silliness, an epiphany that settled comfortably in my mind. The days became a warm embrace of mixed snacks, Saturday movie marathons, and occasional baking soirees where the only rule was if it doesn't look good, it still tastes amazing. It's funny how a sleepover, and all the drama that came with it, could circle back into something nourishing, filling the gaps with laughter rather than tracking rules. With time, I learned to tune out Lisa's opinions and forge my own version of motherhood, one where every smile my daughter wore was worth its weight in sugar. I'd texted Lisa a few times since then, bridging our conversation with casual updates about practice and games, and while she remained polite, the tension between us lingered like an awkward dance. Sometimes, though, I still questioned if I was being too lenient or allowing too much chaos, yet I realized a little chaotic fun, even in the form of junk food, was a gift I was proud to give. On a Sunday afternoon, I brought out the rainbow sprinkles and ice cream, throwing an impromptu ice cream social for Amelia and her friends. They squealed with delight as the ice cream dripped and the sprinkles cascaded over piled high cones. Each burst of laughter felt like a gentle reminder, every day doesn't need to fit into a mold, every meal doesn't need to be perfect. Instead, I learned to celebrate this wild, messy, beautiful phase called childhood, where chaos had its rightful place alongside lessons of moderation. So, was I really the asshole for that sleepover? Maybe a little for being too concerned about the opinions of others, but not for letting my daughter revel in a night of joy. In the grand picture of life, it turned out that love, laughter, and a little sprinkle of chaos were all essential ingredients in crafting lasting memories. As I watched Amelia laugh and play with her friends, effortlessly lost in their bubble of happiness, I knew I was okay with all the contradictions and complexities of parenthood. At the end of the day, I was simply doing my best, and that felt perfect enough. As I settled into the comfortable chaos of our living room, a wave of relief washed over me. The night had transformed from a battlefield of expectations into a tapestry woven with laughter, illuminated by the sporadic bursts of giggles that echoed against the walls, clashing against my doubts like fireworks in the night sky. I sat back on the couch, an oversized bowl of popcorn nestled on my lap, my heart swelling as I observed Amelia and her friends sprawled out across the floor, their individual quirks forming a beautiful mosaic of childhood. I baked those brownies with chunks of chocolate that probably had more sugar than cocoa. They'd turned out to be a hit, their sweet scent melding with the salty popcorn and cheesy nachos that we all started burying ourselves in. Yet, there was still that niggling thought, that seed of insecurity stemming from my conversation with Lisa. Did I really go too far in choosing the menu for the sleepover? Were my intentions, initially pure and joyful, overshadowed by my worry of not fitting the mold of what a responsible mom should be? I wanted to be an influential figure in their lives, an anchor they could return to, but here I was, casting aside the boundary of moderation in this one small area. As much as I prayed my daughter wouldn't be consumed by the judgments of others, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow let her down by embracing the fun side of food instead of becoming the health-conscious mom. But then I looked again. The sight before me, a pile of pillows and blankets, laughter spilling into every corner, was a reminder of the freedom I'd wanted for her. Each girl had a slice of pizza in one hand and a brownie in the other, cheeks smeared with splotches of melted chocolate. Their bond over those treats felt sacred, a moment stolen from the everyday obligations of being children. I recalled my own sleepovers filled with late-night snacks and whispered secrets, how those nights had cajoled the stars out of me, age-old friendships cemented over laughter and late-night debates about which boy band was the best. "Can we have a dance party next?" Amelia suggested, lighting up with that uncontainable energy only youth can possess. The girls erupted into an agreement, and they jumped to their feet like a pack of puppies. I laughed. A dance party wasn't exactly part of the itinerary. But then, what's an itinerary when you're young and alive? As the music started blaring from the speaker, I got up to join them, hesitant at first, but willing to let the rhythm sweep me into their world. I swung my arms, letting go of any remaining self-consciousness while they twirled around me, losing themselves to the beat. For a brief moment, I was that age again, slipping into the simplicity of life without the weight of judgment. The laughter morphed into a chorus of delight, and in that dance, I felt the gentle reminder that while structure is essential, spontaneity breathes life into our existence. Just then, my phone buzzed, and it was a text from Lisa. "Hey, I've been thinking about what you said and I wanted to apologize for being judgmental. You're doing great, and maybe I have some things to work on too." A warmth spread through me. Maybe my heart wasn't racing as much from my worries tonight. Maybe, just maybe, in this complex world, we were all navigating something wholly imperfect together. As I hit reply, I felt resolute. "Thank you, Lisa. We all have our style. Let's collaborate on the next sleepover." The night wore on, a gentle spiral into laughter and camaraderie. As the girls eventually flopped down onto sleeping bags, sleepy-eyed and full of sugar, I knew that in that moment, I'd created a safe space for them to breathe, to thrive. I slipped into my own refuge of reflection, accepting that I was not just a mom who fed her kids junk food but a creator of memories, a guardian of joy. Behind the cozy chaos, love had poured in, filling every corner. And in that messy, beautiful night, I learned once more that sometimes being the best parent means letting go of the whole right and wrong approach, simply allowing love, laughter, and a sprinkle of fun to lead the way. I never thought a night out with friends could turn into such a ridiculous dilemma, but here I was, sitting on a bar stool, nursing my drink and feeling increasingly uncomfortable. It was a Saturday night, and my friends and I decided to hit up our favorite dive bar, the one with neon lights flashing and the kind of energy that makes you forget about work for a while. The laughter and chatter around me felt inviting, but a creeping tension settled in my stomach as the night wore on. There was this guy, Jason, a friend of a friend, who'd been hanging around our group. He was charming in an overly friendly way, and I'd tried to shake off the sense that he was enjoying my company a bit too much. When the night started winding down, Jason proposed that we all share an Uber back to our neighborhood. I was totally on board until he added, "But it's a little tight, so, if you want to sit on my lap, it's cool." A rush of embarrassment washed over me, mixed with indignation. I laughed it off, hoping it was a joke, but he just grinned, clearly serious. I could feel my friend's eyes darting around, unsure, some snickering at the absurdity. My heart raced, and for a fleeting moment, I considered the situation, a mixed bag of social pressure and a desire not to be the downer of the group. But something deep inside me recoiled at the idea of sitting on a stranger's lap, even for a 6-minute ride. I didn't want to make a scene, but the thought alone left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't want to be rude, yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that it would trivialize my own boundaries. In that instant, I decided. No, thanks, I said, trying to sound lighthearted, I'll just call an Uber. Jason raised an eyebrow, and I could feel a flicker of surprise from the others. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as I pulled out my phone, almost relieved when I saw the app open, like a lifeline. The ride arrived almost immediately, and as I slid into the back seat, the warm glow of the streetlights comforted me. I didn't feel guilty, I felt empowered for choosing my own space, my own comfort. But the next day, I woke up to a flurry of mixed texts from my friends. Some thought I had totally overreacted, while others supported my decision. Jason texted me, claiming I was overreacting and, at first, I felt a twinge of uncertainty. Did I really screw things up? Yet, the more I pondered, the more I realized how important it was to stand my ground. So I replied with calm resolve, I respect myself too much to sit on someone's lap. It was silent on his end after that. Eventually, my friends and I had a long conversation where I expressed my feelings, and to my surprise, they rallied behind me. It's funny how a night that started off as just another outing turned into a lesson about boundaries. So, am I the asshole for taking an Uber home instead of sitting on a man's lap? I guess I learned you've got to prioritize your comfort over what's deemed polite, and in the end, standing up for yourself is never the wrong move. It was late when I finally decided to share the story on Reddit. I remember the glow of my phone screen illuminating my tired face as I typed, feeling the weight of the night rest heavily on my shoulders. In the dim light of the living room, with my friends finally winding down after a long evening of laughter and too many drinks, I couldn't shake the tension that had built up over the past few hours. I had gone to the bar that night thinking I was just going to unwind, have a few laughs, and maybe flirt with some cute guys. I didn't expect to find myself in a situation that felt more uncomfortable than exhilarating. It started innocently enough. We were all seated around the booth, sharing stories and shots, and I loved the energy. But as the night went on, the bar grew busier, and tables filled in like sardines. I could feel the air growing heavier, the laughter mixing with the loud music. That's when a guy, let's call him Tom, plopped down next to me. He was charming, I'll give him that, with a disarming smile and witty jokes that kept the mood light. Things took a turn, though, when I noticed the space in the booth could barely accommodate all of us. I was sitting on the edge, and Tom suggested that since it was so cramped, I could just sit on his lap. In the moment, I felt a weird blend of panic and disbelief. I laughed it off, playing it coy, but Tom persisted. I was bewildered. I mean, who offers that up? My body was tense, every instinct urging me to flee. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to summon a smile, but deep down, I was only feeling more and more uncomfortable. As I caught the worried glances from my friends, I took a deep breath and stood my ground, saying, I'd rather just take an Uber home, thanks. And honestly, it was brave of me, I felt brave, until I saw Tom's face fall, that smirk replaced with a mix of confusion and irritation. My friends exchanged looks, and I could hear quiet whispers, some in support of me, others unsure, and I felt suddenly trapped in my own mind. Did I overreact? Was I being rude? I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps this was just a harmless suggestion in the eyes of some, but for me, it represented a line I wasn't willing to cross. After stepping outside to call the Uber, I felt the cool night air hit me like a needed wake-up call. I thought of all the times I had compromised my comfort for the sake of others' expectations, and it filled me with resolve. I'd rather ride alone than feel that pressure to sit on a stranger's lap. As I sat in the back seat, scrolling through Reddit, a thought struck me. Perhaps what I'd experienced wasn't just about that particular instance but about speaking up in a world where being nice sometimes felt like just a cover for discomfort. After typing my story and hitting post, I felt an odd mix of relief and vulnerability. As the comments started rolling in, so many people understood my perspective. You're not the asshole, echoed from screen to screen, a chorus of solidarity that warmed my heart. And while the night was far from what I'd hoped, it turned into something much more significant than just a poorly timed joke. Yes, it was just a night out, but it transformed into an unexpected lesson about what it means to trust yourself. I spent the next few days thinking about that experience, recognizing how often we brush off our own boundaries for the sake of acceptance. I even started to notice more of those moments in my daily life, where I'd hesitate to voice my discomfort, swayed by the fear of seeming rude. Reading through the supportive threads fueled my drive to stand my ground, and I began to embrace saying no when I needed to, a skill I realized I'd neglected in my efforts to go along to get along. A couple of weeks later, I saw Tom again at another bar, and instead of feeling anxious, I just felt indifferent. He approached me to chat, and I politely kept the conversation light. I knew I had made the right choice that night, because ultimately, valuing my comfort over someone else's casual expectation felt like a small victory. I ended up getting home that night feeling empowered, and while I know I might face similar situations again, I also know now that being true to myself is always worth it, no matter how awkward it feels in the moment. In the end, I learned that standing up for myself is never a wrong move. It's a chance to rediscover my voice, my space, and my boundaries. So no, I'm not the asshole for choosing an Uber over a lap, but I'm proud I chose to prioritize me. As I sank into my couch, the soft fabric enveloping me, I couldn't shake the odd blend of liberation and anxiety that still buzzed inside me. It was strange how such a simple decision could spark so many emotions. I replayed the night in my mind, the vibrant laughter, the thumping bass of the music, the wave of warmth that washed over me as I watched my friends dance, each of them lost in their own world. I remembered the moment it shifted, that realization that I was uncomfortable, that pressure to conform to an unspoken agreement just to keep the peace. I had always considered myself a go-with-the-flow person, but that night, I felt something crack within me, something that whispered it was okay to disrupt the flow, that it was okay to be a stick in the proverbial wheel if it meant preserving my integrity. The next few days rolled by in a reflective haze. I felt lighter in my interactions, as if I was shedding some skin. At work, I found myself speaking up in meetings where I might have let others dominate. I would joke about it to myself, saying, "Hey, if I can say no to an awkward lap ride, I can definitely voice my ideas." My coworkers laughed, likely thinking I was just being quirky, but for me, it was a reinvention. The incident became a quiet but significant marker, a reminder of what it meant to assert myself. Later that week, I bumped into Mark at a coffee shop. He was already at a table, scrolling through his phone, when I walked in. The first thing I noticed was the stiffening of his posture as our eyes met. Part of me wanted to walk over, to clear the air, but another part, the braver part, told me to just grab my coffee and be on my way. As I stood in line, I debated my next steps. Should I confront him? Apologize for being rude, or better yet, should I inquire about his reaction? I certainly wanted to know if he regretted it, or if he still felt I had overstepped by turning him down. In that moment of indecision, as I waited for my soy latte, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sarah, my close friend who had backed me up that night. "How are you holding up? I know things got weird with Mark. Let's talk." I smiled, that little flutter of warmth igniting inside again. I shot her a quick reply, reassuring her I was fine and would love to chat. It was strange how one experience could ripple through various aspects of your life, redefining friendships, shifting dynamics. Later that afternoon, after what felt like a caffeine-fueled confession with Sarah, I learned that Mark had been taken aback by my decision, less about my refusal to sit on his lap and more about the way I articulated my feelings. He said something about respect, Sarah recalled. It struck me as comical how he had made a big deal out of a small snub, but there was a grain of truth in it, a lesson for him, maybe. Days turned into weeks, and though I hadn't spoken to Mark since that coffee shop encounter, I noticed a change in him. He approached our mutual friends, started conversations with my name embroidered on a few hesitant apologies that slipped out during group outings. I would hear snippets, vague admissions that felt like half-baked attempts to rewrite our shared narrative. It didn't matter to me as much as it had. I felt grounded, unfazed by his need for validation. Looking out my window as the city hummed below, I realized that this experience, that simple Uber ride home, had opened something within me. I was more attuned to how I felt in various situations, and how I didn't have to adjust myself just to fit someone else's frame. It was then that I understood, some lessons come wrapped in unconventional packages, and sometimes a night of awkwardness can lead to unexpected revelations about who we are and who we choose to become. So, no, I wasn't the asshole, but part of me knew that this was only the tip of the iceberg. I would encounter moments like this again, tiny crossroads where comfort and courage met. Each decision carving out a little more space for the authentic me to thrive. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. I never expected to find myself at odds with my family over something as simple as a door. Living alone in a small apartment, I had carved out my little sanctuary, a place where I could escape the world's chaos and indulge in quiet moments with a good book or a long, hot shower. It was my haven, and after the relentless demands of work and social events that filled my calendar, I often crave solitude. That's why, when my aunt and uncle decided to drop by unannounced last Saturday, I felt a rush of anxiety flood through me like ice water. I had barely returned from a stressful week at the office, 2 deadlines looming over me like dark clouds, and the last thing I needed was an unexpected visit. When I heard the persistent knock on my door, my heart sank. Every part of my being screamed to ignore it, to hunker down with some takeout and let the world fade away. They were the kind of relatives who wouldn't take no for an answer, and I had a pretty good idea that they wouldn't be content with a quick pleasantry at the door before moving on. I stood frozen in the hallway, my mind racing. What if they couldn't see how tired I was? Just duck into the kitchen and hope they give up, I thought, but the knocking intensified, almost urgent. I took a deep breath and, against my better judgment, I opened the door just a crack, enough to catch a glimpse of their expectant faces. The look of surprise on my uncle's face morphed into disappointment as he realized I wasn't prepared for their visit. "Oh, hey. We thought we'd stop by. It's been ages," he exclaimed, as if time bent and twisted in some miraculous way to make their interruption appropriate. I felt the corners of my mouth twitch with nerves. "Hi, yeah, sorry. I didn't know you were coming," I stammered, avoiding their eager gazes. The truth was, I was overwhelmed, tired, and bleeding introversion that day. The warmth of my community sometimes felt like a suffocating blanket rather than a comforting embrace. I wanted to say, "I love you both, but could you please just text first next time?" Instead, I just stood there while they continued to chatter about their week like I should be all ears. In amidst their dialogue, my thoughts spiraled. Am I being unreasonable? Am I really the boss of my own space, or have I lost touch with what family means? I scanned the apartment and realized my living room looked like a tornado had swept through. Mismatched socks strewn on the floor, a half-eaten slice of pizza languishing on the coffee table, definitely not the kind of setting I wanted to showcase. I knew they would judge, not that they meant to, but from experience, I knew my aunt's disapproving eyebrow would only rise higher the longer I stood there. "You have a minute?" she asked, as they pushed their way inside, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions brewing inside me. "Actually, I'm really in the middle of something," I mumbled, my voice barely more than a whisper. But my attempt to stand my ground fell flat. Family members don't generally take those kinds of refusals on face value. And, like a slow-burning fuse, resentment began to ignite. I felt trapped between my genuine care for them and my desperate need for peace. The unease spun into a knot in my stomach. Was I the bad guy for wanting to protect my own mental space? They began to settle in, invading my sanctuary with their animated banter, laying their jackets on my couch, leaning over to inspect my bookshelves as if they were an exhibit. It dawned on me that they had no clue how much I longed for solitude at that moment, how important those quiet Saturday afternoons were for my sanity. The more they laughed and caught up, the more distant I felt, like a spectator in my own life. I remembered countless Sunday dinners when spontaneity put a smile on my face, but this one was different. A part of me wanted to just fold into their warmth, to let the walls come down, but the other part was desperate for a clean break from the world outside. Finally, after an hour of small talk filled with casual questions about my work and my love life, or lack thereof, I mustered the courage to intervene, gently asserting, "Hey, I really appreciate you guys stopping by, but I'm feeling a bit exhausted. Can we catch up another time?" Their cheerful expressions faltered, disappointment clouding their faces. "Oh, but we came all this way," my aunt began, her voice dropping an octave, inscribing guilt deeper into the fabric of my resolve. "That's the thing about family, sometimes, even love can carry an expectation, an unspoken demand that feels heavier than steel." As they finally gathered their things, I felt a mix of relief and guilt gnawing at my insides. Had I overstepped? Was I too harsh in my execution? I closed the door behind them, their voices fading down the hall, questioning my choices like fair-minded jurors. Hours passed, and I sat cross-legged on the floor amidst the chaos of my living space, letting the internal battle wane. The authenticity of my emotions washed over me in waves. Maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe needing alone time wasn't some personal failing. But the lingering question echoed in my mind, would they see it that way? In the days that followed, I texted my aunt to suggest we meet for coffee later in the week. "I'm sorry I wasn't up for a visit, work has been a lot," I wrote, hoping to bridge the chasm. I saw her reply flash on the screen, "No worries, we'll plan something. We miss you." Part of me sighed in relief, while another part knew this was just the beginning of a longer conversation about boundaries, connection, and the balance of family. Because in the end, maybe it wasn't about being right or wrong, Perhaps it was about understanding each other's needs without sacrificing one's own peace. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to do both. That interaction with my mom lingered in my mind for days. I took that moment to reflect on our relationship, something I had been avoiding for far too long. I never intended to be the estranged family member. I simply found myself caught in the whirlwind of adult life, work obligations, personal goals, and the day-to-day chaos that came with it. But their way of expressing love felt overwhelming at times, like a tidal wave crashing over me. I set aside my phone and gazed out the window, watching as leaves scattered in the wind, twisting and turning in ways that reminded me of the often erratic nature of our family dynamics. My family had long adopted a policy of drop by unannounced, a tradition I found charming at first but now felt like an intrusion into my carefully curated solitude. I appreciated the effort, truly, but I questioned whether they understood that my home was my sanctuary, a place I needed to recharge away from the world's demands. The guilt of not being who they wanted me to be crept in like an unwanted guest, taunting me with thoughts of how they must perceive my distance. Yet, I had never felt more like myself than I did now, navigating my boundaries. It didn't take long for that uneasy tension to rise again when Thomas, my brother, suggested a weekend visit. I braced myself, knowing that I'd be the odd one out at the dinner table, dishing out platitudes while my family laughed over nostalgic stories, all while I hovered over my thoughts like a wallflower at a party. This time, though, I felt a tug, a mix of obligation and desire to maintain that connection, even if it was strained. "Hey, can we chat about when you guys come?" I typed hesitantly, deciding to voice my concerns before the weekend arrived. I didn't want another instance of family craziness that left me feeling frazzled and misunderstood. A short reply came back, "What's up? We're excited to see you." I swallowed hard. There was that sense of enthusiasm again, crackling through the screen as if I were there with them. Maybe it was an opportunity for understanding, or perhaps it would swing like a pendulum back to my fears of rejection. Saturday morning drapes the house in a hazy light, and the doorbell pierces through the quiet like a gunshot. My heart races as I stand in the middle of the living room, frozen in place, and the moment stretches into eternity. Hand clenched around the doorknob, I hesitated, considering the possibility of peeling back the layers of silence, of explaining that I craved acceptance of my choices, my pace, my space. Instead, I took a deep breath and unlocked the door, plastering on a smile that I hoped didn't betray any anxiety. Their startled faces morphed into grins, and the warmth of their presence filled the hallway, intoxicating and overwhelming all at once. "We brought your favorite." My mom held up a blueberry pie, and for a fleeting second, the sweetness of nostalgia wrapped around me like a hug, but the tension brewed just beneath. I invited them in, trying desperately to hold on to the comfort while wrestling with unease. As they settled in like they owned the place, the conversations rushed and tumbled over each other, but every sound felt amplified, a cacophony of expectation, love, and my desire for silence. I knew I had to seize this moment to lay bare my feelings. "You know," I started, my voice shaking slightly, "I appreciate these spontaneous visits, I really do, but sometimes I just need a little heads up." They halted, all eyes on me, surprise etched across their faces. My stomach knotted, and I can hardly bear the silence that ensued. But then, slowly, my brother nodded while my mom frowned slightly, a wrinkle of puzzlement forming on her forehead. "Oh, honey, we didn't know you felt that way," she whispered, her voice softening. A flicker of hope ignited in me. The moment hung in the air, heavy yet tender, and in that silence, acceptance danced delicately among us, paving a newfound path. As the afternoon rolled on, we spoke more openly, the conversation bridged gaps I feared would swallow me whole. They acknowledged my need for space, and slowly, we carved out a rhythm that allowed for both connection and solitude. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the blue sky igniting in a riot of orange and pink hues, we had not only shared laughter and stories but also something even more precious, understanding. I sat back, quietly content, relishing the newfound balance of knowing that love could be given without drowning, that boundaries didn't have to mean isolation, and yes, that my voice mattered in the symphony of our family. As I waved goodbye, my heart felt a little lighter, and I realized this was just the beginning, not just for them, but for me, a dance toward that ever-elusive harmony between connection and self-care. As I watched their car disappear down the winding road, clarity washed over me. I had navigated so many emotional landmines recently, battling guilt and resentment while trying to figure out where I fit into this intricate web of familial love and obligations. I couldn't help but smile. Maybe it wasn't about asserting myself with brash words or avoidance anymore, it was about conversing, sharing space, and, most importantly, communicating my needs without feeling like I was the villain. I felt like I was finally shedding the layers of guilt that had wrapped around me like a heavy blanket for years. The next week, I decided to open a dialogue with my siblings during our regular Sunday video call. The cozy backdrop of my living room, with its soft, ambient lighting, felt like a good setting for what I hoped would be an honest discussion. As we chatted, I could feel my heart racing a little. My brother started talking about an upcoming family reunion, throwing numbers and dates at me as if I was sitting on the edge of a precipice. The old urge to either withdraw or placate them bubbled up. "Hold on a minute," I finally found my voice and said. "I really appreciate that you guys want to include me, but I've been feeling overwhelmed with everything." The screen filled with thoughtful faces as I tried to find the right words. "I love you all, and I want to be part of this, but I also need time for myself. If I push myself to show up for everything, I won't be able to show up at all," I confessed. Silence followed, a rare occurrence. I could see my sister's brow furrowing, and I worried I'd said too much. Then, slowly, her expression softened. "I get that," she said. "We want you to take care of yourself. You're not being selfish. You're human." That simple acknowledgement felt like a life buoy tossed my way when I had been treading water trying to keep everyone else afloat. One by one, they shared. They talked about their own struggles balancing social events and the pressure to conform to family expectations. As I listened, something shifted in the energy of our call, an empathic exchange that filled the gaps I had felt before. Each realization we shared breathed new life into our connection. By the end of that hour, I felt more heard and understood than I had in years. The weight of expectation lifted a little more off my chest, replaced by a reassuring warmth. Maybe they did see me and my struggles after all. Weeks turned into months, and I began to reshape not just my boundaries but our collective family dynamics. I found peace in saying what I needed, be it declining an invitation or suggesting a smaller gathering over a chaotic family event. Surprisingly, changes rippled through us. My siblings began to vocalize their own needs more openly, and in a way, we all started forging a richer, more authentic relationship. In realizing my own boundaries, I inadvertently encouraged them to explore theirs. Looking back, it's funny how that initial hesitation to open the door to unannounced visitors had been a pivotal moment. I didn't shut them out, I just showed them I needed space, a new boundary. It wasn't a rejection, it was a request for understanding. Life with family wasn't about keeping score or avoiding conflict, it was about building a comfortable home in each other's hearts, however imperfect the walls might be. And here I am, on the edge of another sunset, wondering what the future holds for us all, MacGuffins of emotion and history mingling with reverberations of laughter and love. I can feel the promise of more conversations ahead that will continue to carve out our path as we venture toward a fuller, more nuanced version of family. It's not a perfect resolution, but it's a hopeful beginning, one day at a time. I never imagined I would find myself grappling with a question as sensitive as whether it was time to kick my daughter out, especially when that question came tumbling out of my mother's mouth one rainy Sunday afternoon. It was a lazy day in early fall, the leaves had just started to turn, and we sat cozied up in my kitchen over mugs of chamomile tea that neither of us would touch. The silence was heavy, like the clouds outside, and I remember staring down into my half-empty cup, willing myself to come up with something to say. My daughter, Sophie, was curled up on the couch with a book, blissfully unaware of the circus I felt unfolding through our kitchen table. She's 22 now, working part-time while finishing her last year of college, which is what might have fed my mom's concern that Sophie was still living at home. Yet, to me, it felt rational. I wanted to support Sophie, especially after the turbulent years we'd both navigated. Her father walked out when she was a child, and raising her alone had made our bond tighter. I remember my mom leaning back, her perfectly coiffed hair gleaming even in the shadowy kitchen light, and she said it casually, like we were discussing the weather or her latest gardening exploits. "When are you finally going to kick her out? She needs to learn responsibility." Just like that, my calm facade shattered. I snapped, an instinctive reaction that surprised even me. "Mom, she isn't just some inconvenience. You have no idea what we've been through." My voice cracked, the tension in my chest coiling tighter, and I felt shame ripple through me even as the words escaped. I saw her eyes widen, and for a moment, we were both quiet, the air thick with unspoken words. Regret washed over me immediately, but it was too late, the damage lingered in the small distance between us. For days afterward, I replayed that moment in my head, a loop of my harsh tone echoing in the hallways of my mind, and I couldn't shake the guilt that settled uncomfortably in my gut. I kept reminding myself that my mother had concerns, possibly shaped by her own rigid upbringing and traditional values, but it didn't make her comments sting any less. I wondered if I was doing the right thing, coddling Sophie instead of pushing her out into a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The days turned into weeks, and I still found myself nervously checking in with Sophie more than ever, asking if she was happy and if she felt ready to face the world on her own. Her eyes, always so bright, now carried a hint of responsivity that made my heart ache. "Mom, I appreciate everything," she'd said one evening, her voice steady. "But I don't feel ready yet." In that moment, I recognized a fear reflected back at me, a fear I felt myself creeping up on me every time I looked at my child. So, we settled into this uneasy truce, a space where I could honor her own timeline while reckoning with my need to protect her. I could hear my mother's voice spiraling into my mind, faint but constant, "She has to learn." Yet I thought of my daughter's fragile light and wondered if, perhaps, learning didn't always mean being pushed. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew this: love is not just about preparing someone to leave, sometimes it's about promoting their growth at their own pace. And as the autumn breeze drifted through the open window, carrying away the remnants of summer, I felt a whisper of hope that by holding space for Sophie, I was doing just that. I don't know if my mother will ever fully understand my choice, but I'm coming to terms with the idea that my love for my daughter doesn't fit into anyone else's prescribed timeline. Someday I'll have to navigate that conversation with her, but for now, I'm content in that microcosm of our little family, learning together. The sunlight began to fade, casting long shadows across the living room, and I found myself curled up on the couch with a half-read novel, the pages dog-eared and filled with notes. Outside, leaves crunched beneath the feet of passing neighbors, their laughter a gentle reminder that life continues to move forward, whether we're ready or not. I glanced at the clock and sighed, thinking about how every tick echoed my mother's words from the earlier conversation, poking at my mind like an annoying itch I couldn't scratch. "When are you finally going to kick her out?" Each time I replayed it, the irritation bubbled inside me anew. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate my mother's concern; she had always been practical, a voice of reason in our sometimes chaotic lives. But this was my child we were discussing, not a pet that needed housebreaking. Sophie had always been sensitive, more like me than I cared to admit, and after everything she went through, I simply couldn't bring myself to push her out into a world I had long learned could be cruel. Sure, she was 23, and yes, she'd taken a detour through college that seemed to last an eternity as she battled anxiety and depression. Watching her navigate life felt like standing on a fault line, waiting for an earthquake to swallow us both. I poured myself a cup of tea, the warmth of the mug grounding me as if it could somehow seep into the anxious pins and needles crawling beneath my skin. I couldn't shake the worry that my mother's perspective simmered beneath the surface like a threatening storm. What did she know of parenting a child with a mental health struggle? What right did she have to judge my choices when she'd hardly touched on the tempest that Sophie faced daily? I ran my fingers along the rim of the mug, thinking of the last time we had sat down together, just Sophie and me. It was a rainy afternoon, and we'd built a makeshift blanket fort in the living room, a womb of comfort in which we could finally have honest conversations, the kind that felt like whispers of the heart. I remembered how she had confided in me about her fears, her worries about finding a job, and the very real dread that she may never feel normal. The way she crinkled her nose and looked down, barely meeting my gaze, stabbed at me. I wanted so badly to tell her everything would be all right, that she would find her way, but all I could do was hold her, cocooning her in my embrace and promising to be there for as long as she needed. As I set my cup down on the table, the clinking sound echoed in the stillness, and I closed my eyes, imagining Sophie's laughter, her lopsided grin when something amused her. It was in those moments of lightness that I saw brilliance. She was creative, frightfully intelligent, and so sensitive to the nuances of life that it broke my heart every time she struggled. Who was I to impose my timeline on her? I had my own life, filled with failures and achievements alike, but those were mine, and they did not govern hers. Just as I was learning to breathe with the weight of my choices, perhaps she was carving her own path and simply needed the time to do so. And yet, the conflict festered. I thought of my conversations with friends who had children living on their own, working jobs, exploring relationships. They spoke of independence like it was a rite of passage, and sometimes I felt that familiar pang of doubt, like I was somehow failing Sophie by allowing her to stay. Their remarks, meant to uplift, often made me question my own approach. Maybe I should insist she look for jobs more seriously. Maybe I need to stop enabling her. But then I heard the sighs of exhaustion within my daughter's laughter, the cautious optimism she wore like a threadbare coat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that giving her a little more time might just be the nurturing she needed to eventually blossom. Later that evening, as a cool breeze swept through the window, I decided it was time to talk to Sophie. I found her in her room, the door slightly ajar as she hunched over her sketchbook, pencil in hand. Ignoring the instinct to tiptoe in, I knocked softly. "Hey, can we chat for a minute?" She looked up, her brown eyes widening before she nodded, setting the pencil down as she shifted on the bed, an invitation wrapped in her silence. I perched on the edge, nerves fluttering in the pit of my stomach. "I know things have felt heavy lately," I started, her gaze locked onto me, searching for reassurance. "And I want you to know it's okay to feel how you're feeling. You're allowed to take your time." I watched her expression soften, the tension in her shoulders easing as I spoke. "Your grandmother, well, she doesn't quite get it," I said with a light chuckle, and she began to smile, her laughter a balm to my worries. "But I'm not in a rush. You're not less of a person because you're figuring things out differently than others. We'll figure this out together, okay?" As she nodded, a semblance of relief washed over both of us. It felt like we had created an unspoken pact, one that said growth didn't need a deadline. I left her room feeling more at peace, allowing myself to embrace the uncertainty. As the last light of day dipped below the horizon, I realized that the journey we were on wouldn't always be easy, but we would face it side by side. Maybe in time, I'd find the words to share with my mother, maybe she would one day understand that love doesn't conform to schedules. But tonight, I was grateful just to sit with my daughter, letting the calm that settled in our little home wrap around us like a warm blanket as we navigated this unique dance together. As I settled into that familiar rhythm, the evening light fading into twilight, I could hear the gentle rustle of leaves just outside, the sound mingling with the soft notes of the piano as Sophie practiced in her room. The music floated through the hallway, a series of tentative chords punctuated by the occasional error, but there was a beauty in her struggle. She was finding her voice, even if it wasn't perfect yet, and that's all I could ever really ask for. I glanced at the clock, it was nearly dinner time, but I wasn't in a rush. Instead, I found myself feeling grateful for the stillness around us, the kind that only comes from being fully present in the moment. But then, like a sudden storm cloud on an otherwise calm day, I felt my phone buzz against the table, jolting me back to the reality of my life outside this cocoon. It was a message from Mom, a simple text that read, "When are you finally going to help her on her way?" My heart sank, and though I knew I should have been prepared for it, I felt the familiar prick of anger lodge deep within my chest. This wasn't the first time she'd broached the subject, and I could almost hear her voice laced with that familiar undertone of urgency, the kind that suggested a timeline I simply did not subscribe to. I took a deep breath, trying to parse through my emotions, the tension knotted up inside me. What was it about our relationship that continuously made love feel so conditional? Was my mother really so blind to Sophie's journey, or was she just projecting her own insecurities onto me? The clash of perspective felt unbearable at that moment. I wanted to respond, to unleash the frustration that bubbled up, but I also wanted to protect Sophie from the weight of our family dynamic spilling into what was otherwise a peaceful evening. Struggling to focus, I found my thoughts drifting back to the meals we'd shared, the laughter that sometimes danced in the air, but I still felt torn. With a small sigh, I placed my phone down without typing a reply. As if sensing my upheaval, Sophie peeked her head out of her room, her curious eyes searching for clarity. "Mom? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice cutting through my haze. I forced a smile, one that I hoped didn't betray the turmoil within. "Just a little message from Grandma," I replied, hoping to deflect. "Nothing to worry about." She nodded, but I could still see the flicker of concern in her eyes. That was the thing about Sophie, she always saw me, often better than I saw myself, and I realized I needed to be more intentional about how I engaged with my family, how I stood up for us both without spilling the dirt and leaving a mess. "Hey, want to try a duet? I bet I can play the melody while you tackle the piano part," I suggested, eager for a distraction. Her face lit up visibly, and just like that, everything fell into place again, the music rising to fill the air, soft yet unyielding. That one simple moment reminded me we were in this together, that our journey, while disjointed, was ours. The shadows of my mother's expectations lingered, but for the rest of the evening, they faded against the backdrop of our laughter and shared melodies. I wrapped my arms around Sophie as she played, letting the warmth of our bond seep deep, and beneath the surface, I held onto the narrative that was continually being rewritten, A story not dictated by others but one woven in love, patience, and time. As the last notes dripped into silence, I knew I still had a conversation ahead, but now there was a steadiness in my heart. Maybe I'd write a letter to my mother, pour out my feelings in words. Maybe, just maybe, she would understand that some journeys unfold in their own, beautifully chaotic way. But until then, I would lean into this moment. We were building a sanctuary, brick by gentle brick. I still can't believe what happened at my house last week. I live in a small, quiet neighborhood. My home is my sanctuary. It's where I unwind after long days at the office, where I bake my famous chocolate chip cookies, and where the peace of mind comes from knowing I'm in control of my space. When I bought this place, it was just me, and I loved it for that reason. But lately, things have been shifting. It all started on a breezy Saturday afternoon. I was in my kitchen, humming under my breath while the sweet smell of vanilla and melting chocolate wafted through the air. There was a knock at my door, nothing unusual, perhaps a neighbor, or maybe even a delivery. When I opened it, there stood a woman, early 30s, hair pulled back in an impatient ponytail, and beside her was a little girl, maybe 6, with muddy shoes and a candy-stained shirt. "Hi. Sorry to bother you, I live just a block down and I'm in a bit of a bind," the mom said, her eyes darting nervously. Right away, something felt off. I had a million things to do, and my instinct was to politely decline, but instead, I just stood there listening. She explained that her car had broken down and she needed to wait for a friend to pick her up. Could they just stay for a little while? Now, I know what you're thinking. What's the harm in offering a couple of strangers a place to hang out momentarily? But as she talked, the unease grew in my stomach. I was imagining the crumbs and chaos her child might bring into my pristine living room, which I had just tidied up. Still, I let them in. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the girl dashed to my potted plants and began poking around, while her mother plopped on my pristine couch, checking her phone like it was a ticking clock. The tension started to rise in me, but I balanced on the edge of playing gracious host and keeping my sanity intact. "Please don't disturb that," I warned gently, watching the little girl tug at the leaves, only to be met with a vacant stare from the mom who barely looked up. It felt like an age passed, and I tried engaging them in small talk, yet the responses were vague at best. Time crawled, and I was just about ready to ask them to leave when chaos erupted. The girl, now bored, had turned her attention to my art supplies, scattering everything all over the table with gleeful shouts. Her mother was still glued to her phone. I could feel that simmering frustration escalate to a boil. Finally, with all the control I could muster, I shouted, "Get out. Both of you. You cannot just come into someone's house and act like you own the place." My voice echoed through the hallway as if summoning the spirits of past homeowners who would disapprove of such a scene. Time halted. The mother's eyes widened in disbelief, the little girl froze mid-tugging at the nearest brush. Realizing what I had done, I felt the weight of my own rage suffocating me. It was an outburst I hadn't intended. The mom, flushed with embarrassment or anger, gathered her daughter's things, fumbling through my living room, and rushed out without a word. The echo of the door slamming shut left me shaken, and my heart raced with an unsettling mix of guilt and relief. Maybe I had overreacted. I thought about the boundaries, the slow realization of how easily someone can slip into your life and home without permission. In the days following, I was consumed with anxiety. I knew my reaction wasn't a shining example of graciousness. I was the bad guy in this scenario. Friends were mixed in their opinions when I shared the story. Some told me I should have been kinder, while others defended my right to protect my space. I didn't know which side I fell on. All I knew was it didn't feel right to let them in the first place. So, I reached out to the mother through a social media platform focused on local community connections, apologizing for my outburst and explaining how overwhelmed I had felt. To my surprise, she replied days later, saying she understood the situation. She was just as overwhelmed with her own stress. We ended up messaging back and forth a few times, even laughing about how life's chaos often spills over, especially for parents trying to manage it all. As uncomfortable as that day was, I think it brought us closer in a strange, honest way, leading me to reflect on the shared struggles we all face. Who knows, maybe next time I'll be better prepared to handle unexpected visitors, or perhaps, I'll finally be able to embrace a little bit of that chaos I once feared. I still think about that day, the strange blend of embarrassment and relief that lingered long after the dust settled. In the week that followed, my conversations with Kelsey shifted into something unexpected, a cautious friendship born from an awkward moment in my living room. We hadn't met up in person since, and honestly, even the thought of it terrified me. I had reluctantly opened my door, both to a literal visitor and to a window into a world outside my own rigid routines. I remember sitting by my kitchen window, which overlooked the busy street that once felt so far removed from my life, and watching the families hustle by. Their lives seemed so full of everything I had avoided: the noise, the laughter, the mess. I scrolled through my phone one dreary afternoon, pausing at a photo Kelsey had sent. It was of her at a park with her son, laughing over a picnic spread that they had captured mid-bite in vivid colors. The joy radiating from that shot made me ache for a connection I'd shunned for far too long. Embarking on this new, unusual friendship was shaky at first. I found myself second-guessing every text, wondering if I was bothering her. But she seemed eager to chat. Her humor kept creeping in, reminding me that maybe I wasn't as hopelessly out of sync with the rest of the world as I thought. "Just a couple of imperfect adults," she texted once, during one of our late-night exchanges. I chuckled, finally letting my guard down just a little. Our messages felt like little life buoys amid the turbulent waters we were both navigating. Then, 2 weeks post-chaos, Kelsey sent a message that threw me. She was planning a small barbecue for the neighborhood and suggested I come. My heart raced at the thought of being surrounded by unfamiliar faces. What if I'm the only one without kids there? I thought, battling my introverted nature. But then I remembered our last exchange, how she'd alluded to a family that might be just as overwhelmed as I was. There was an odd kind of comfort in that realization, a shared humanity and feeling lost amid our roles. Gritting my teeth, I reluctantly agreed. The day of the barbecue felt like preparing for an exam I hadn't studied for. I walked into her backyard, heart pounding, trying to steady my breath amidst the laughter and clinking of glasses. To my surprise, the atmosphere buzzed with warmth, the scent of grilled burgers wafting through the air. Kids played tag, their squeals of laughter mixing with the sounds of easy conversations. Kelsey spotted me first, and her face lit up like a beacon. "You made it," she called out, and in that moment, any anxiety I had ebbed away. Slowly, I started mingling, conversations flowing more naturally than I anticipated. I learned about the other parents and their various struggles, in parenting, in life, common experiences resonating through their stories. Their laughter reminded me how liberating it was to just be, without the confines of expectations running my day-to-day. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting everything in soft hues of orange and pink, I found myself chatting with a mother named Sarah, who was going through a separation. I listened to her fears echo some of my own, our conversation like a threading of kindred spirits who had weathered storms unseen to each other. I wasn't expecting this, being pulled into a collective narrative of struggle and perseverance, but it filled a void I didn't know I'd been trying to fill. When I spotted Kelsey across the yard, tending to the grill, I smiled, a silent thank you escaping my lips. Maybe at that moment, surrounded by strangers who shared the same evening light, capable of their own chaos, I realized I wasn't the only one feeling overwhelmed and isolated. I could feel the threads of connection weaving around us all, stitching us together in this weird, chaotic fabric of community. That night as I drifted to sleep, I felt lighter, unburdened from the weight I had been carrying. I thought about our original conflict and marveled at how one moment, one chaotic, unexpected moment, could unravel a tight-knit cocoon I had spun around myself and reveal the world outside. Who knows where this newfound openness would lead me? All I knew was life was messy, but perhaps it's the mess that reminded us we're all human, endlessly trying to figure it out. And maybe embracing a little chaos wasn't such a bad thing after all. The next morning, I woke up feeling oddly invigorated by my new perspective. As I sipped my coffee, the sun poured in through the kitchen windows, illuminating the chaos of my kitchen table, half-finished projects, to-do lists that seemed to multiply overnight, and crumbs from snacks I never got around to cleaning up. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I let out a soft laugh. I noticed the beauty in the clutter, the laughter of my kids playing in the other room, and for a moment, I even found it charming. I finished my coffee and decided to embrace the unpredictability of my day. I pulled out my phone and shot a message to Sarah, the mom of the kid I'd yelled at. "Hey, I'm going to the park later with the kids. Would you like to join us?" There was a slight flutter of nerves in my stomach as I hit send, but I hoped she might appreciate the invitation. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, her excitement palpable through the screen. "I'd love to. We could all use some fresh air." That afternoon, as I gathered the kids and packed a picnic, which, let's be honest, mainly consisted of granola bars and whatever leftovers I could scrounge, I felt that lightness from the other night creeping back in. The park was only a few blocks away, so we walked there, my kids running ahead, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. When we reached the park, I spotted Sarah and her son, Jamie, already there, smiling and waving. She looked a touch frazzled, her hair slightly tousled, but wasn't that part of the charm? We were all in the same boat, struggling to navigate this beautiful mess called life. As the kids played, Sarah and I found ourselves on a nearby bench, sipping bottled water, and exchanging stories. We shared little victories, like managing to get both our kids to school on time and the absurdity of trying to cook dinner while juggling a million other tasks. I could feel the remnants of that chaotic day beginning to fade, replaced by a shared understanding and camaraderie. She talked about feeling alone in her journey, and it hit me hard. How often had I cloistered myself in my own worries instead of reaching out? We laughed about our moments of parenting failure, like the time she accidentally sent her daughter to school in mismatched shoes. I thought it was a fashion statement, she joked, her eyes twinkling. Turns out it was just a mess. The ease of our conversation felt like a soothing balm. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was part of something larger, a community of fellow parents who were all just trying to figure it out while managing their own chaos. As the sun began to set and the sky turned into a canvas of oranges and pinks, I realized this was exactly the kind of connection I had been missing. It didn't matter that we'd started off on rocky ground, here we were, laughing and sharing amid our imperfections. I had learned that moments of conflict could lead to something beautiful, like the intertwining of two chaotic lives into one shared experience. We packed our things as the sky darkened, our kids, blissfully oblivious, still racing around. I looked over at Sarah, now my ally instead of an adversary, and we promised to meet again. Walking back home, I felt the chaotic fabric of community wrap itself around me a little tighter. Maybe, just maybe, this mess wasn't something to fear but something to embrace, a chaotic tapestry of hope, shared laughter, and the kind of connection that truly makes life rich. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a long time, grateful for the unpredictable journey that had brought us together. It seemed that embracing chaos had opened a door I didn't even know needed opening. I never thought something as trivial as skincare samples could lead to a mini-dramatic saga in my life, but here we are. You see, I'm somewhat of a beauty aficionado. There's just something about the glossy packaging and the promise of glowing skin that gets me every time. Recently, I placed a rather extravagant order with one of my favorite online brands, and in the box, among my beloved new serums and creams, were several freebies, an enticing array of moisturizers, eye creams, and masks. I was practically vibrating with excitement when I opened the package, my heart racing at the thought of testing out all these new products. But then I got a message from my friend Olivia, who I swear has some sort of sixth sense for when I'm hunting for skincare goodies. She casually asked if I'd share one of the freebies with her. At first, my instinct was to say yes. After all, we've been friends for years, and it's not like I wouldn't eventually use them all, but then a little voice in my head started whispering doubts. Olivia has a habit of always wanting something from me. Whether it's borrowing clothes or asking for my food, she rarely offers anything in return, and a seed of resentment was starting to sprout. I poured myself a glass of water and paced my tiny kitchen, considering all these thoughts swirling in my mind. Would giving her a sample feel like giving in? Did that make me selfish? What if this was just one more scenario where I was letting her take advantage of my kindness? I knew it sounded ridiculous, but I could almost hear the chorus of friends in my head saying, "You're not obligated to give her anything." After mulling it over, I typed a hesitant response saying I was really excited about the samples and wanted to keep them all for myself this time. Her reaction was swift and sharp, like a dagger to the gut. "Wow, thanks for nothing," she replied, followed by that pregnant pause of silence that spoke volumes. I could feel dread creeping in as I anticipated the fallout. Days went by in this weird in-between space where I felt nauseous about our friendship. I tried not to think about Olivia scrolling through Instagram, likely wondering if she should unfriend me. The guilt was unbearable. Even though I told myself I was in the right, it didn't feel that way at all. I'd lay in bed at night staring at the ceiling while replaying our conversations in my mind, convinced I had ruined our friendship over a trivial tube of moisturizer. When I did get a call from her a week later, my heart sank. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have snapped at you," she said, and I could hear the sincerity lacing her tone, but part of me still felt vulnerable, hanging on the defensive. I'm ashamed to admit that I let our previous exchanges color my view. We met up for coffee, and rather than bringing it up, I tossed the tension in my back pocket, hoping it would remain there for good. Over lattes and pastries, we slowly patched things up, exchanging laughter and stories of our most ridiculous beauty blunders. Then came the moment I didn't expect, when Olivia leaned in and confessed how she had been feeling insecure about her struggle with skincare lately, always comparing herself to me like I was somehow the beauty guru supreme. That simple moment of vulnerability shifted everything for me. I realized this wasn't just about a tube of eye cream, it was about wanting to feel good enough, not just for others but for ourselves. As we packed up our things and said our goodbyes, I felt lighter, like a fog had lifted. I still didn't give her a sample, but I learned something far more valuable about compassion and friendship. Maybe I wasn't the asshole for wanting to keep a little something for myself, but I'd like to think I could open up my heart a little more, and next time, maybe instead of a sample, I could offer her a different kind of support. We all have our battles, whether they're fought with skincare products or self-esteem, and I think there's enough love to go around if we let it. Sitting on my couch later that evening, the remnants of our conversation flickered through my mind like a movie reel. The sunlight had dipped low, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, and it was a moment that asked for reflection. I curled up in my favorite blanket, clean and soft against my skin, and I could still hear the gentle thrum of Carla's voice, the way it had wavered just slightly when she talked about her struggles. It had always been challenging for her to navigate the world of self-care, not just in terms of the products we used but in understanding that taking care of ourselves wasn't something we should feel guilty about. I had often hoped to impart that wisdom to her, but my protective instincts had kicked in, convincing me that keeping the samples I earned felt justifiable, especially when I'd put in the effort to justify the splurge. I pulled out my phone almost subconsciously, scrolling through messages and photographs until I landed on one I had saved of my latest skincare haul, beautiful products lined up, glistening in the sunlight, each promising a new layer of comfort and confidence. But the excitement had dulled a little now, more of a reminder than a trophy. Instead of rushing to put it away, I paused on the image, feeling a twinge of guilt I hadn't expected. It was easy to say I'd offered enough just by sharing my thoughts and support, but had I truly been a good friend? What about the little secrets we shared, the plans to embark on a self-care weekend together one day, a day where we'd pamper ourselves without a hitch? I closed my eyes and pictured us at my kitchen table, masks slathered on, giggling as we debated which Instagram skincare trend we should try next, our laughter echoing through the room like a bomb. The thought soothed me, propelling me to realize that friendship wasn't one-sided. Maybe I could bridge that gap of selfishness by reaching out, even in small ways. "Hey, Carla," I texted slowly, "I was just thinking about our plans for a self-care day. How about we do it this weekend? My place, your favorite snacks?" I paused, biting my lip, hesitating over the next part. I wanted to offer more than just casual companionship. I wanted her to know it was reciprocal, that her battles truly mattered to me. "And I can share some of the new products with you if you're interested. We can take a look together." As the message sent, I felt a surge of relief. I wasn't erasing my prior hesitation about sharing my samples, but rather transforming it into something more meaningful, something I could offer that wasn't just a quick fix but a long-awaited connection. It registered as a reminder: vulnerability could be a bridge, not a barrier. Moments later, my phone buzzed with a reply, and I nearly held my breath. "I'd love that. You're the best." I smiled back at the screen, warmth spreading through me. Just as I was about to climb into my own thoughts, a message popped up, filled with an array of heart emojis. My heart swelled as the reality hit me: sharing didn't always mean losing something of myself. Sometimes, it meant discovering a depth of friendship, a bond stronger than any surface mask. I thought of how I would show up for her, next time, not waiting for samples but rather, embracing moments that knitted our hearts closer. That night, I drifted off to sleep with a sense of hope hanging in the air, ready to explore what our little self-care weekend might bring, understanding that every relationship needs nurturing, just like our skin, both requiring gentle care and sometimes, a sprinkle of love. The next day was one for the books, a slow Sunday morning filled with the soft promise of new beginnings. I brewed a steaming cup of chamomile tea, letting the comforting aroma wrap around me like a warm blanket. As I sat on my well-loved sofa, the sun poured through the blinds, casting playful patterns across the room. I thought about how I could turn this seemingly trivial skincare conflict into something more meaningful. It hit me that I could invite Lisa over for a proper self-care day instead of simply waiting for our regular hangouts to become about swapping products. I envisioned a skincare extravaganza, 3 types of face masks, homemade scrubs, and a playlist filled with all our favorite tunes from college. I wanted to create a space where we could laugh, cry, and talk about everything, the gossipy surface stuff and the deeper issues we sometimes skimmed over, tapping into how our battles with skin insecurities mirrored our struggles with self-acceptance. That week, I shot Lisa a text, inviting her over for our self-care extravaganza. I added an emoji of a face mask because who could resist that? To my delight, she responded with a flurry of enthusiasm, and just like that, I felt a little spark of joy ignite inside me. On Saturday, as we prepared for our day together, I set out all my favorite skincare items, the delightful textures, the riot of scents. My bathroom transformed into a mini spa, complete with soft towels and even a couple of candles that flickered gently in the dim light. The setup looked like something out of a trendy Instagram post, but I cared more about the experience than aesthetics. It wasn't long before Lisa arrived, and as soon as she stepped in, her face lit up, a mirroring reflection of my own excitement. We settled onto the floor, armed with our masks and goofiness, and the laughter flowed easily, freeing us from the strains of our daily lives. We tried to put on our masks while discussing everything from work woes to the anxieties keeping her up at night. As we applied our clay masks, I encouraged her to embrace the idea of letting go of those harsh judgments we both had about ourselves. After all, as our skin dried beneath the thick layer, we joked about how ridiculously we both looked. It felt liberating to share our fears, to validate each other's struggles without judgment, just understanding. Yet as I watched her unwind, I realized how deeply vulnerable she was about her own skincare battles, how they seeped into her self-worth like ink on paper. It reminded me of my own feelings of inadequacy, the quiet moments of doubt that clung to me like shadows. More than once during our discussions, I could sense the struggle behind her laughter, that raw need for reassurance. I decided then that this was a pivotal moment. It wasn't about skincare samples anymore. Instead, I reached out, encouraging her to talk about the things we often sweep under the rug, all while the masks effectively dried on our faces. Toward the end of the day, when we both peeled off our masks and wiped our faces clean, I noticed something different in Lisa's demeanor, a lightness about her that hadn't been there when she'd arrived. Perhaps it was the masks, or perhaps it was the genuine connection we had fostered throughout the day. I realized that this was what friendship could be, supporting each other, peeling back layers of our insecurities together, and sharing not just products but our vulnerabilities. As our day came to a close, I felt a mixture of gratitude and fulfillment. I had opened a new chapter in our friendship, and now we both understood that sometimes, sharing our truths could be far more impactful than sharing physical stuff. She left with a parting hug that felt solid and grounding. I watched her walk away, and I couldn't help but smile. It was a beautiful reminder that while skincare might enhance our outer glow, it's the bonds we cultivate that truly illuminate our hearts. Weeks later, I'd often find myself reflecting on that day. I knew I had not just extended an invitation for a skincare session but rather created a framework for deeper conversations in our relationship. Just like the careful balance of ingredients in a skincare product, I understood that the delicate nature of friendship needed a mix of honesty, kindness, and a willingness to show up. I felt lighter, more connected, and ready for whatever life would throw our way, because maybe, in the end, it's not about the samples we hold on to, but rather the moments we create that keep our souls nourished. I never thought I'd find myself in a position where I'd have to question whether or not I was the asshole for something so trivial, but here I was, staring at a pot of burnt spaghetti and 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. That's how it always started, my wife Kelly's cooking adventures. The first time we had dinner together, she crafted this incredible dish that made my taste buds dance. I thought I'd struck gold. But as months turned into years, I came to realize that her culinary skill wasn't so much an adventure as it was an ongoing gamble. Sometimes we'd feast like kings, and other times, well, let's just say a pizza delivery was always a phone call away. It wasn't that she didn't try, she genuinely loved to cook. I admired her passion and enthusiasm, often overshadowing her misadventures in the kitchen with supportive cheers and lighthearted jokes. What I did not count on was how that playful joking would snap back one evening when frustration eclipsed my empathy. It was a Tuesday, the day she usually cooked and, as fate would have it, she attempted a new recipe from a cooking show she'd binge-watched. I could hear the sizzle from the living room. Hours passed, the aroma was less vibrant than I remembered, and I felt a knot of instinctual dread. When she finally presented her new creation, my heart sank. It was, remarkably, a gloppy mass that resembled the aftermath of a science experiment gone wrong. I took a deep breath, knowing I should keep my mouth shut, but the words escaped before I could catch them. Kelly, maybe you shouldn't cook. The moment they left my lips, I could feel the weight of what I'd said crashing down on us. The laughter I'd hoped for with my light teasing transformed into a crumbling silence. Hurt flickered across her face, and with it, the shift in the atmosphere left me breathless. I defended myself, trying to explain my feelings, but I could see my words peeling back layers of her self-esteem, and it was suffocating. We ended up eating leftovers, both of us too wrapped in our own thoughts to even playfully argue about whose turn it was to pick the takeout. I went to bed that night wrestling with a whirlwind of guilt, convinced I'd crossed a line. Was I just frustrated from a long day? Or was I genuinely an asshole for being so blunt? I kept replaying her expression, that flicker of disappointment that felt like a stab to my heart. I tried to talk to her the next day, but the energy had shifted, she was quieter, her laughter diminished. I missed the light-hearted banter that filled our home, the warm aroma of love that cooking together always brought. After a few days of silence and the awkwardness that lingered like a bad aftertaste, I finally sat her down and apologized. I told her how much I cherished her attempts and how it didn't matter if dinner wasn't perfect, it was the effort and love behind it that counted. We talked, really talked, unraveling the misgivings each of us felt. I wanted her to know I wasn't trying to attack her passion, I was just overwhelmed by the constant letdowns. After that frank conversation, we came to an understanding, a cooking schedule that would help her try simpler meals and, on days when she wanted to experiment, we'd do it together. I think that's what our relationship needed, real communication. I still remember her eyes brightening at the thought of cooking together, and even as we stumbled through the recipes, we made a hell of a mess that turned into so many laughs. And honestly, that's what I needed too, a reminder that it's not about the food. It's about the love served alongside it. In the end, I realized we were both learning in our own way, catering to each other's strengths, and I could only hope that she never stopped experimenting in the kitchen, no matter what. It's funny how a simple spatula can become a bridge in a relationship, transforming small arguments over burnt toast into laughter over spilled sauce. I hadn't expected our cooking sessions to turn into something special, but as we continued, they became a staple of our weekends. We'd put on music, her playlist with those catchy pop songs that made me think of summer even in the snowy months, and take our time chopping, boiling, and mixing ingredients as if we were crafting a masterpiece rather than just a dinner. I can still hear her singing off-key while I struggled with the knife skills I'd picked up from culinary shows. The first time we attempted a homemade pizza, I thought it was going to end in disaster, given how she had no idea that dough needs to breathe. But the mishaps turned into moments we'd cherish forever, like when the cheese overflowed and we both just stood there, giggling amidst the chaotic kitchen. I began to appreciate that cooking was more than just a task, it was a canvas for our creativity and a testament to our partnership. We'd watch videos on new techniques, eager to impress each other. Sometimes, when it didn't go quite as planned, like that time the chicken ended up tasting like a rubber ball, we would just order takeout and sink into the couch to binge watch something stupid. It wasn't about perfection, and I think that realization was the turning point for both of us. I could see her confidence growing, not just with the meals but in herself, which lit a fire in me to be more encouraging, to let her know it's perfectly okay to mess up. On one particularly snowy afternoon, we decided to tackle a new recipe, a beef stew that required hours of patience, simmering on the stove while the aroma danced around us. As the rich scent filled the house, she looked at me with a gleam in her eye and said, "This feels real, doesn't it? Like home." And in that moment, it hit me, this was our home. It wasn't just the walls or the furniture, it was in these shared experiences, in the laughter, in the mess, that made all the difference. We spent that evening curled up on the couch, bowls in hand, talking about our dreams and plans, while flurries tapped lightly at the windows. It made me reflect on how easy it had been to focus on the negatives, to get caught in a spiral of frustration rather than celebrating what we had. The evolution of our cooking sessions mirrored that change. Together, we'd stirred up much more than just ingredients, we'd cooked up understanding, patience, and a renewed sense of teamwork. I know there will always be days ahead where everything won't taste like a Michelin star meal, but I've learned it doesn't need to. In those moments, I realized that we could laugh at ourselves, pull together as a team, and enjoy whatever the outcome. Looking back now, I can't help but smile at how far we've come. In the early days, I worried that I hadn't handled things well, that my words had been too harsh or damaging. But those days full of flour and spills have shifted the narrative between us. Together, we discovered the joy of cooking wasn't in the final dish but in sharing the mess, and somewhere between those meals, we found a renewed sense of love for each other, simmering just right. And I really, truly hope we never stop serving each other in the kitchen or beyond. It's funny how life can dish out unexpected lessons in the most mundane settings. Just the other night, after an exceptionally busy day, I found myself curled up on the couch, savoring that sense of contentment that follows a full, laughter-filled day. The kitchen was alive with the warm glow of the evening sun filtering through the curtains, and the scent of garlic, the unmistakable aroma of a concoction my wife had put together on her own. It struck me that a few months ago, I would have been feeling the gnaw of anxiety as I anticipated another meal that might miss the mark. Now, however, I found myself leaning back, letting the scents wash over me, a soft smile creeping onto my face. I marveled at how far we'd come and how, in many ways, we were still finding ourselves and each other amidst the chaos of life. That evening, I got up to help her, making my way into the kitchen, and as soon as I entered, she turned to me with a smirk. "You ready to test your sous chef skills?" she teased, a sparkle in her eye. I chuckled, wrapping my arms around her waist, pulling her close for a brief moment. "Only if you promise to save some for me this time," I said, recalling one of our earliest experiments where I'd gotten so involved in chopping vegetables that I inadvertently turned our dinner into an impromptu taste tasting, grabbing for each bite like a ravenous beast. She laughed, recalling our culinary disasters with an affection that painted over the stresses of those earlier days. We chopped and stirred, shared playful banter, and I could see her confidence grow with every dish. Each splatter of sauce felt like a brushstroke on the canvas of our relationship, transforming a bland palate into something vibrant. As she stirred the pot, I noticed the little things, the way she bit her lip when she was focused, the gentle hum she made when she was happy. It was all part of the woman I fell in love with, and I realized that those delightful quirks brought more to our time together than any perfect meal ever could. We talked about our week, shared our worries, and I felt like each shared ingredient was a piece of ourselves being mixed together, creating something unique and beautiful. I appreciated how our partnership had deepened, not just in the kitchen but across every part of our lives. We were learning to communicate better, understanding the importance of patience and support, even outside the realm of recipes. When dinner was finally served, I couldn't help but grin at the sight before us, a colorful array of far from restaurant quality dishes spread across the table and absolutely bursting with love. We gawked at them for a moment, both of us silently agreeing that it was more about the laughter than how many Michelin stars we could earn. As we sat down, I held her hand across the table, feeling a swell of gratitude that she had taken a chance on me, that we hadn't just settled into patterns of complaints, but had chosen instead to laugh and learn. Each bite, while it may have been imperfect, was accompanied by our shared stories, playful digs about culinary schools never calling us back, and the realization that, really, any meal we enjoyed together was bound to be spectacular. Looking back, the moment I made my poorly chosen remark about her cooking, I had no idea our journey would wind into such beautiful chaos. It was as if we had both stepped into a poorly lit kitchen, only to find that together we could brighten the entire room with laughter and understanding. While I still joke that her cooking isn't always perfect, I've learned to appreciate the joy each dish brings. And like the best meals, I hope we continue to spice things up, learning from each other along the way and warming our hearts over whatever we decide to throw into our pots next. I always thought of myself as a generous friend, the kind of person who'd go out of their way to make sure everyone around me felt included and cared for. But this one night, sitting across from Mia at our favorite Italian restaurant, I started to question everything about my kindness. It was supposed to be a simple catch-up dinner. We hadn't seen each other since the chaos of her breakup. As I sat across from her, sipping my water and picking at my risotto, I noticed how her eyes danced with excitement as she perused the menu. She started with a glass of wine, then quickly added an appetizer, followed by a main course that was twice the size of mine, and before I knew it, she was contemplating dessert like it was the only meal she'd eat for a week. My mind raced, and I tried to wrap my head around the idea of splitting the bill equally when it clearly wasn't equal at all. I felt a knot in my stomach. Would she expect me to foot the extra cost because she was having a tough time? Midway through her meal, Mia turned to me with a smile that was both captivating and vaguely suffocating. "You know, you don't have to hold back on the spending. Just because I'm in a rough patch doesn't mean I can't enjoy a little splurge," I chuckled awkwardly, trying to brush off the awkward tension that simmered in the air. The thought of her expectation clung to me like an unwelcome guest. I had been there for her during the breakup, offering late-night phone calls and ice-cream-soaked evenings on the couch, but this felt different. As she savored her dessert, I couldn't ignore the mounting frustration. Why was it my responsibility to cover her choices? I contemplated saying something, but every time I opened my mouth, the words fizzled out. Instead, at the end of the meal when the check arrived, I took a deep breath, picked it up, and examined it with the intensity of a detective looking for clues. "Mia," I said quietly, "I think you ordered quite a bit more than I did, so I'd really prefer we split this based on what we each had." Silence thickened the air between us, and her eyes flashed briefly, confusion mingling with annoyance. Wow, really? I know things haven't been great, but you know I'm not trying to take advantage of you, right? I felt my face heat up. Deep down, I just wanted her to own her choices. But how do you say that to a friend without it sounding cold? Feeling vulnerable, I muttered an apology and paid my half, leaving a slightly awkward silence that lingered long after we parted ways. I drove home that night questioning if I had been an unreasonable jerk. Did standing my ground make me the villain in this friendship? The emotional whiplash gnawed at me, leaving me unsettled. A few days later, there was a text from Mia. Hey, I felt really bad about how I reacted at dinner. I guess I was just trying to enjoy myself, but I should have considered how it would come across. Relief washed over me, but it didn't completely erase the discomfort. I typed a quick reply, letting her know I appreciated her message and understood where she was coming from. Still, the underlying tension lingered in the back of my mind. What did that dinner really mean for our friendship? In the end, I chose to believe I wasn't in the wrong. I needed to stand my ground, after all, even if it came at the cost of a little discomfort. Even now, when gatherings with friends come up, I hesitate over the check at the end, a tiny ripple of anxiety reminding me of that night. But maybe, just maybe, it was a necessary lesson on boundaries and understanding. One little dinner shaped my perspective in ways I never anticipated. I found myself replaying the events of that evening over and over. It was a simple enough dinner, really, a casual meet-up to catch up on life, just the two of us, at that cozy little Italian place we loved. The laughter and easy conversation flowed naturally at first, like it always did. We reminisced about college years, the ridiculous antics of our late-night study sessions. I even managed to muster up the courage to broach the subject of the latest guy she was dating, her eyes lighting up as she described him. But as our plates cleared and the night wore on, the tone shifted just a bit. She, vibrant and enthusiastic, seemed to let the moment carry her a little too far. Let's order dessert, she'd said, her eyes glinting with excitement. I nodded enthusiastically, not wanting to dampen her spirit. We shared a slice of rich tiramisu, layers of coffee-soaked sponge and creamy mascarpone. It was heavenly, and I had no regrets. But then she casually suggested we grab another one, and before I knew it, our waiter was hurrying back to our table with yet another dessert. The check arrived, and I felt my stomach knot. It had jumped up to a shockingly high number. I chewed on my lower lip, glancing at the bill while she was still blissfully absorbed in her dessert. I'll get this one, I said, quickly calculating how much her extra choice would add up to my share. When she turned and smiled, her fork paused mid-air. I felt a rush of annoyance rise in me. Wait, are you serious? You want me to cover your half? That was when things went a little sideways. She shrugged unapologetically, her casual demeanor doing nothing to soothe the tension in my chest. Come on, we can split the dessert. It's only fair. But it felt wrong, like she was assuming my generosity was inexhaustible just because we were friends. I froze, emotions twisting in my stomach. Was I being selfish? Was it about money, or was there something deeper here? We both worked similar jobs, but her recent trips and excessive spending on shoes and other luxuries loomed in my mind. I had to think of my own budget too, especially after I had recently decided to save for a trip I had always wanted to take. Eventually, I moved past it. No, I can't cover that. I'm good, but this was your choice, I said firmly, my voice steady, but I could tell my resolve surprised her. She frowned, her smile fading, and for a moment, I thought I caught a glimmer of disappointment. You'd really make me pay for my own dessert? She replied, the tone now tinged with something sharper than mere surprise. I thought we were friends. Friends share everything, I sighed, frustration bubbling just below the surface. We do, but not everything is fair game. I'm not okay with paying for something I didn't eat. The silence in the air between us felt heavy, almost suffocating. The laughter that had filled our previous conversations drifted away, leaving behind an awkward tension that both of us were too stubborn to break. I could feel the weight of my decision, and as the server returned, I forced myself to say, let's split the bill then. I didn't want an argument, I wanted my friend back. She nodded curtly, and I swiped my card, feeling the sting of the moment settle like a stone in my gut. Even in the days that followed, it's like I was reading subtext where there was none. Texts were slow to arrive, and when they did, they felt less charged with warmth than before. It gnawed at me because, deep down, I cared about her. I found myself grappling with my own emotions. Was I justified in standing my ground, Or had I pushed her away in the process? Finally, a week later, she invited me to a group outing with friends. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for another check dilemma, but I missed her too much to decline. As the night unfolded, I braced myself for the awkwardness that might arise. But then, something unexpected happened. There we were, surrounded by mutual friends, and she got up to make a toast. To friendships, both the easy and the hard, and to learning what it means to share. I'm grateful for every miscommunication that teaches me what really matters. Her eyes flickered toward me, and my heart clenched. Did she mean that? I couldn't make sense of the words swirling in my mind, so instead, I raised my glass to her. To being honest, and figuring things out as we go. The group laughed, and, for the first time in days, the tension between us felt like a thread weaving its way back together. Now, as our friendship continues to grow, there's still that tiny ripple of anxiety when it comes to sharing bills, but it's been a lesson. I reevaluate what generosity means, not just for others, but for myself as well. With every dinner outing, I aim to balance giving with being guarded, setting boundaries while still cherishing the moments we have. And who knows? Maybe it's not about who pays for what at the end of each meal, but about the conversations we'd fill those moments with. I can't deny that the unease of that dinner still lingers in the background, but it's like a shadow I've learned to accept rather than fear. When Elena texted me again, suggesting we grab lunch at our favorite cafe, my heart did a little dance of excitement and anxiety. I could picture the sun streaming through the windows as we settled into our usual corner table, a cozy nook filled with mismatched chairs and a menu bursting with options. The day arrived, and as I walked in, the smell of fresh brewed coffee enveloped me. Elena was already there, twirling a strand of hair around her finger, a smile lighting up her face. We exchanged our usual pleasantries, and I could feel the past wash away like the fleeting aroma of cinnamon in the air. We fell into easy conversation, sharing stories about our week, the highs, the lows, the mundane details that made us feel alive. It felt good, familiar, like slipping into an old pair of shoes, worn but so comfortable. Then came the time to order. I knew I was being cautious as I scanned the menu, mentally calculating prices, almost hyper-aware of how much a salad versus a rich, creamy pasta dish would cost. The last thing I wanted was to relive that evening at the Italian bistro. When the waiter arrived, I opted for a simple sandwich and water. There was a flicker of worry when I noticed Elena, gleefully pointing to the burger, loaded with extras, and the decadent chocolate cake she insisted on getting for dessert. Come on. Live a little, she teased, nudging my shoulder playfully. I forced a grin, but inside, I couldn't help feeling that familiar tension creeping back. As we ate, every delicious bite of her burger seemed to weigh on my mind. Did I seem cheap for not indulging like she did? Should I even care? We talked about everything, plans for the weekend, her new project at work, and my recent obsession with gardening, while I tried to focus less on the bill that would eventually come. But deep down, I started to feel that knot of resentment again. Why do I always have to be the one drawing the line? Isn't friendship supposed to be about sharing joy, not just money? After we polished off the last bite of cake, Elena insisted I share with her, saying it'd be a crime not to indulge in dessert together. I felt a pang of guilt for not just letting loose and enjoying the moment. But when the bill arrived, I braced myself. I scanned the total, and my heart sank. It was more than I'd budgeted for. I barely had money left for groceries this week. I took a breath, feeling the tension mix with guilt. Okay, look, I'll cover my part, I said this as nonchalantly as I could, trying to maintain that light-hearted spirit our lunch had encapsulated, even as my nerves unraveled. Elena frowned, her brow furrowing a bit. Seriously? You know I wanted to treat you today, right? It's just lunch. A part of me felt relieved at her insistence, even if it stirred something deeper. I know, and I appreciate it. But really, I'd prefer to split it this time. I'm tight on cash this month. She paused, her expression softening as if she finally understood. Got it. I was just having fun and wanted to celebrate our friendship, you know? I felt a rush of warmth. We can still celebrate without spending too much, right? Her eyes sparkled, right. It's about us, not the money. In that moment, everything clicked. We weren't just friends balancing bills, we were two individuals learning to navigate the complexities of generosity and boundaries together. The anxiety still flickered at the back of my mind, but now it felt different, like a reminder to keep communication open and honest. As we finished up, we walked outside into the crisp afternoon air, laughing over who would win in a race to the nearby park. I realized how freeing it was to keep the conversation light and tethered to experiences rather than expenses. Maybe this was the real lesson. It's okay to set my boundaries while still savoring the joy of connection. Sure, there would still be bumps along the way, and those small ripples of anxiety might never fully dissipate, but I was learning to ride the waves instead of letting them drown me. And sometimes, amidst the laughter and love, that was enough. I remember the day everything changed like it was yesterday. The warm sun spilled into my college dorm room as I balanced my classes, endless readings, and the issues of friends with the routine of my freshman year. I had finally settled into my independence, reveling in the freedom of living away from home. But then I got a call from my older sister, Clara, who was already struggling to take care of her fast-growing baby, Emily, after an unexpected breakup with her boyfriend. Clara was at her wit's end. "Can I crash at your place for a while? Just until I get back on my feet?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing she was in a tough spot, but the dread sank in as well. My dorm was tiny, meant for two, and seriously incapable of accommodating a baby and a grown adult. I hesitated, my mind racing through everything I'd already navigated in my new life. "Clara, the dorm is really small. It's a shared space, and I think it would be cramped for you and Emily," I finally replied, steeling myself against the disappointment I could sense through the phone. The silence felt thick, oppressive. "You don't understand," she countered, her voice rising slightly. "I have nowhere else to go. I need your help." I felt the walls closing in on me. I could already picture the messy diapers, constant feedings, the late-night crying mixed with my 8 a.m. classes and the frenetic energy of college life. I couldn't see how it could remotely work without it spiraling into chaos. She responded with thinly veiled indignation, "So this is what family means to you? Just ditching me when things get tough?" The accusation stung. I found myself wanting to explain that she was my sister, that I loved her, that my legs were shaking as I stood my ground, but even as she continued to push, I felt my chest tighten. An internal battle unfolded, each memory of the time she had supported me, every sacrifice she made boiling down to my refusal to be the safety net she desperately needed. Still, I knew I was doing the right thing, preserving my own mental space, yet shame burned in my stomach like acid. I could only muster a small, "I'm really sorry, but I just can't," before she hung up. The next day felt hollow. I went to classes and tried to focus, but Clara's words echoed in my mind, clouding any joy I previously felt about college. Days passed, and our relationship became strained. I received the occasional text filled with disappointment and frustration. The more time that passed, the heavier the ache between us felt. What I really couldn't shake was the nagging thought, was I the asshole? Maybe family meant being stretched beyond breaking for one another, but my dorm felt like a prison designed to choke the last waves of independence I had left. I steered clear of social media, hoping my peers' endless joys wouldn't twist the knife deeper, but I spent nights tossing in bed, replaying the moment over and over in my mind. In the end, Clara found a temporary place to stay with a mutual friend. We talked through it one night, frustration spilling over like the brim of a glass that had been too full. "You hurt me," she said softly, the anger replaced with vulnerability. It hit me hard. I had, in some way, shifted the burden of her struggles onto my own shoulders, intending to protect myself while causing her pain. I apologized, genuinely this time, realizing we weren't at war but traversing different battles. We both cried, sharing our vulnerabilities, and in that raw, open moment, I understood, sometimes being the good sister doesn't mean rescuing, sometimes it means being honest, even if it hurts both of you. Now, months later, we're not back to where we were, but there's a new understanding, and perhaps a tentative acceptance that we both have our paths to navigate, and sometimes those paths don't intersect as neatly as we wish. It's been a few months since that emotional exchange, and while we're not instantly best friends again, there's this unspoken truce hanging in the air like a tentative peace treaty. We've started texting more, usually about the mundane stuff, her telling me about late-night diaper changes while I ramble about my dorm meals and exam stress. It's less about the big, dramatic moments now, more like a slow rebuilding of our friendship brick by brick. I remember last week, just a regular Sunday, when I decided to call her while I was huddled under my pile of textbooks, desperately trying to absorb the chapter on Shakespeare. I asked her how things were going with the baby, and she laughed a little, telling me how she finally managed to get him to sleep without having to rock him for an hour first. The way she spoke, with this mix of pride and exhaustion, made me smile. Here's this woman I grew up with, and despite all the chaos, she's learning and evolving into a mother like I always knew she could. It hit me hard in a way I wasn't prepared for, realizing she's not just my sister anymore, she's a whole person living in a completely different world now. A little later, the conversation turned more serious, as it often does when we start to dig deeper. She admitted she still felt a bit lost, caught between who she used to be and who she's becoming. While I sat there, I remembered all those times I felt like I was drowning in university pressure, how lost and unseen I sometimes felt amidst it all. It clicked in that moment, as much as I felt like I had to protect my own space and sanity, she was still navigating her ocean of changes alone, just like I was with mine. Instead of feeling defensive or put upon again, I found myself wanting to help her, not out of obligation but because I could understand that loneliness. I suggested we set a regular time to check in on each other, maybe a video call where we could let our guard down and just be ourselves, sisters trying to figure it all out together, even from a distance. I wasn't sure if she'd agree, but surprisingly, she loved the idea. Let's not just do this when things get hard. Let's make it a thing, you know? She responded, and it reminded me how vital that connection is, even if it's just to hear her voice or see her face. That familiarity brings comfort. Now, we're weekly catch-up buddies, and it doesn't always look how I imagined a sisterly bond should be, less about shared rooms and secrets, more about shared struggles and laughter over video calls. I've started to realize that love isn't only about proximity, sometimes, it's about showing up, even if it's from 1,000 miles away. We're both still in our own battles, making our own choices, but I feel like we're slowly learning to cheer for each other from the sidelines, which in itself can be a form of love. Sometimes, I think back to that tension-filled moment when I refused her request, wondering how differently I might have reacted. But for now, I'm thankful for the path that's opened up between us. It feels fragile, but in this world that sometimes seems so disconnected, it's like a breath of fresh air, reminding me that there's always room for understanding, if only we let ourselves be honest with one another. As the months rolled on, I found myself reflecting on that pivotal evening more often than I imagined I would. The crisp fall air had settled in, and with it, the leaves painted the campus in rich hues of orange and gold. It was the kind of season where students were buried in their textbooks, but I often let my mind drift to the complex tapestry of my relationship with my sister. What that confrontation had unveiled wasn't just frayed emotions but a shared, unspoken desire for connection amidst our chaos. Sophie had oscillated between feelings of empowerment and despair since becoming a mother, and I admired her ferocity. She was fiercely independent, yet there were nights I could almost hear her struggling through the silence, the kind where a baby would cry in the background, overlaid with muffled sighs. I could picture her tucked away in her tiny apartment, surrounded by baby toys and half-folded laundry, trying to balance motherhood with her ambitions. It made me think about how every time she called, her voice teetered between needing help and not wanting to burden me. I sometimes wondered if I was too self-absorbed, caught up in my college life while she was knee-deep in late-night feedings and toddler tantrums. There was guilt wrapped around each of those thoughts. Now, whenever I visited her, I tried to walk the fine line between being supportive and not overwhelming myself. I remember one evening as I sat in her living room, the walls plastered with graduation photos of us, two sisters in cap and gown, faces beaming with pride. It hit me then, our lives were so intertwined, yet we had become strangers in some way. I didn't realize how lonely I would feel, you know? She admitted while bouncing her baby on her knee, a wistful look crossing her face. I could barely respond. Taken aback by the faint tremor in her voice, the realization that even in motherhood, her battles were hardly over. In those moments, I learned to listen more than I spoke. I'd sit quietly, absorbing her worries, her triumphs. Her description of a difficult day was often patterned with frustration followed by determination, and I couldn't help but respect her even more for it. I made it a point to visit regularly because even if I couldn't fully understand her experience, I wanted her to feel the presence of someone who cared. Sometimes, she'd simply need a break, those afternoons when I'd take the baby out for a stroll. We didn't always need to talk, our companionship lay in shared silence, the occasional laugh that ignited between us over something mundane, both of us savoring the distance we had navigated to reach this point. When winter rolled in, the air turned biting, and the city began to glow with holiday lights. I invited her to come stay with me in my dorm for a weekend, a little escape I thought we both could use. I felt a surge of exhilaration thinking about how my small space could host both her and my tiny niece, albeit temporarily. Sophie hesitated, her conventional worries creeping in about wrangling a restless child in a cramped room, but I could see her eyes light up at the prospect. At that moment, instead of scrambling for all the reasons why it might not work, I encouraged her, assuring her that we were both capable of this new adventure together, one that didn't revolve around cramped quarters. It felt freeing. The day she arrived was filled with light-hearted chaos. There were diaper bags on the floor, laughter replaced by a mixture of soft coos and squeals, and a dance between our different worlds. It was messy, not in the way of a fight but in a beautifully chaotic way that reminded me how far we had come. We each carved out our space among the clutter of pillows and toys, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, our conversation found its rhythm again. Sophie's laughter echoed around the room like a warm embrace, reminding us both that we could, indeed, build bridges instead of walls. We didn't solve everything, but that's the beauty of life, isn't it? It's not about having the answers at every turn, but rather about embracing the uncertainties together. I've come to realize that paths can diverge and reconnect in the most unexpected ways. Perhaps it was just a weekend in my little dorm room, but it was a testament to our bond, evolving, redefining, standing strong enough to withstand the storms before us. As we tucked ourselves in that night, enveloped in the kind of shared warmth that felt rich in its tender familiarity, I knew we were on the brink of something beautiful. Our battles were still ours alone, but the acceptance dawned that we could face whatever came next, not remembered as the lost sisters, but rather as those learning to be there for one another, even from a distance. And in that, there was a kind of victory worth celebrating. It was a Friday night when everything spiraled out of control. My roommates had left for the weekend, and I was finally looking forward to a little alone time with a guy I had been seeing for a few weeks, Jake. We'd been texting like teenagers, and deciding to have him over felt both thrilling and slightly reckless. The rain was pouring outside, creating a cozy atmosphere, and all I could think about was how nice it would be to watch a movie and share some popcorn together. But as the night unfolded, I realized I was in for more than I bargained for. Just as we settled down on the couch, the mood lit by soft lighting and the faint sound of raindrops hitting the window, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my roommate, Melissa, who had gone home to her mom's place. At first, I shrugged it off, but when I glanced at the message, my heart sank. "Hey, can you keep it down? My mom is trying to sleep." I thought about responding to reassure her, but then Jake leaned closer, and I forgot about my phone altogether. The dialogue in front of us faded as tension filled the air, and it wasn't long before we were lost in each other. Just as the movie played on, laughter erupted from me, followed by Jake's playful remarks. That's when it happened. 3 loud, furious knocks pounded at my door, punctuated by the unmistakable voice of Melissa's mom, "Shut the fuck up." It was an implosion of shock. I froze, wild thoughts racing through my mind. Did she really just pound on my door? In my apartment? I glanced at Jake, who looked just as startled, and for a moment, we exchanged looks, an unspoken mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't want to open the door, but I also felt weirdly obligated to address what had just happened. I took a deep breath, my cheeks heating up as I approached the door. I peeked through the peephole, half expecting it to be my imagination, but she was there, arms crossed and a scowl that could scare a bear. Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions stirring inside me. This is my apartment, and I'd appreciate a little respect. But instead of backing off, she banged harder, "You shouldn't be so loud. Think of others." There was an immediate tension in the air, thick enough to cut. I was furious but also flustered and embarrassed. The last thing I wanted was to be in a standoff with my roommate's mom. "I'm sorry, we'll keep it down," I replied, the words feeling like defeat. Jake shifted awkwardly behind me, and I felt myself shrinking, like a child caught misbehaving. When her footsteps faded away, I turned back to Jake, my cheeks still burning. "I can't believe that just happened," I said, my voice barely a whisper, feeling both humiliated and annoyed. "Yeah, that was intense," Jake replied, trying to lighten the mood with a crooked smile. But I couldn't shake off my embarrassment. "Do you think I'm the asshole here?" I asked, half joking but deep down, feeling the weight of her words. "I mean, it's our space." But then again, I didn't think about how loud we were being. Jake shrugged, "I think she overreacted. Just because she doesn't want to hear you having fun doesn't mean you should have to hide." I nodded, feeling a little comforted, but I couldn't escape the swirl of mixed emotions. As the night continued, it was hard to focus on anything else. The initial excitement had fizzled into a mix of anxiety and self-doubt. What if Melissa felt the same way? What if I really was the problem? After he left, I collapsed onto my bed, the night replaying in my head like a broken record. Should I write to Melissa and apologize, or would that just confirm I was in the wrong? Was I really the one who'd crossed a line here? In the days that followed, I spent a considerable amount of time lost in a loop of whether or not I should approach Melissa about it again. Part of me felt defensive. It was my home, after all, but then again, I didn't want to create unnecessary tension between us. Eventually, I did reach out. "Hey, can we chat? I'm sorry if we were too loud the other night," I typed out. I watched the three little dots dance as she typed back, my anxiety bubbling. "It's fine. Mom just gets like that sometimes. Thanks for saying something." The relief washed over me, but this lingering question hung in the air: was I truly wrong to let loose in my own space? In the end, it didn't seem to matter as much. I learned that sometimes, even in your home, you have to navigate the constant balancing act of respect and personal freedom. And that's just life, finding that middle ground between living fiercely and being considerate. Even if it took a knock on the door from Melissa's mom to figure it out, it was a lesson learned. It was a couple of weeks later when the whole scenario faded into a distant memory, tucked neatly alongside other college mishaps. I was mostly back to my routine: classes, work, the occasional movie night with roommates. But every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting another unexpected visitor. It wasn't that my roommate's mom was a regular fixture in our lives, but that incident had a way of imprinting itself, a reminder that boundaries could be so easily crossed. One evening, I had finally decided to treat myself and unwind with a glass of cheap wine and that new show everyone was raving about. I remember feeling the warmth of the alcohol settle comfortably in my stomach as the credits rolled. The apartment was quieter than usual, the hum of the refrigerator a soft backdrop to my thoughts, and I couldn't resist the urge to kick back and binge watch. Just as I was sinking into the couch, a message pinged on my phone. It was Melissa, my roommate, asking if I could give her a ride to the grocery store. I noticed the clock. It was nearing 10 p.m. I hesitated for a moment, torn between my desire to relax undisturbed and wanting to be a good roommate. Opting for the latter, I texted back, "Sure. Just let me finish this episode." Melissa's response was quick, clearly eager. "Thanks. I'll be ready in 15. As I tossed my phone onto the couch, I found myself smirking at the irony of the situation. The last time I'd had a guy over, it hadn't gone great, but here I was, willingly putting on my altruistic hat and totally ignoring that nagging voice in my head. 15 minutes later, I was in the one car we had shared, parked in the grocery store lot surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights. Melissa climbed in, a flurry of movement with her purse and a list that she waved enthusiastically in front of my face. I made a plan this time. "We won't end up with 8 boxes of cereal," I chuckled, appreciating her diligent efforts to keep our fridge alive. As we drove, I couldn't help but notice how her mood had shifted over the last few weeks. Melissa seemed lighter, happier. Maybe it was just the thrill of independence or a deeper realization about her own boundaries. Either way, it was nice to see her so animated, and it started to tug at my heart a little, reminding me she was a good friend, despite her mom's overly assertive parenting style. The atmosphere in the car buzzed with easy conversations about mundane things: classes, parties, the ever-growing stack of laundry that awaited both us at home. But as we turned off the lively street into the quieter residential neighborhood, I felt a pang of anxiety mingle with the lightness. I didn't want to navigate any emotional heaviness tonight. Just as I was thinking about the general awfulness of adulting, Melissa's phone buzzed. I could see her mumble, "Oh, it's my mom," as she clicked on the message. "What does she want?" I asked, half joking. Melissa promptly rolled her eyes, but her expression shifted. "Oh. I think she's asking why I haven't returned home yet." I smirked, ready to tease her about being grown, but caught myself. She had been assertively carving out her own space lately, even splurging on new clothes and ditching old habits she no longer wanted. That confidence felt contagious, but instantly, I felt twinges of guilt for my own behavior. Did I have a moment to share the living fiercely lesson I'd learned? Or was I just biding my time until my own surface changed? As we entered the store, I tried to shake off the creeping sensation. Eventually, Melissa and I fell into our usual routine, scanning the aisles for snacks and sharing our dietary sins with each other. A rhythm, a comfort. Somewhere around the frozen foods, we heard a commotion. I glanced back towards the entrance, wrinkling my brow. A man standing outside the store was clearly trying to get someone's attention, waving his arms like a conductor. I didn't think much of it, but Melissa paused mid-sentence and stared, an expression of recognition washing over her face. "Oh no," she muttered. "It's my mom." I turned and sure enough, there was her mom, hands on her hips, staring at the man as if he might turn into a pumpkin at midnight. My heart sank a bit for Melissa. The last thing you want is your mother circling like a hawk on your coattails. Just as I was contemplating our escape route, her mom finally saw us. It was like those moments in bad sitcoms where the planet stops spinning, and every character locks eyes in slow motion. "Melissa! I was looking for you," she shouted, her voice ricocheting off the store walls. We exchanged glances, a silent agreement of solidarity. I could only imagine what was coming. As her mom marched toward us with purpose, I debated whether I should vanish into the cereal aisle or just face the impending storm. "Mom, it's fine. We're just shopping," Melissa chimed, but her mom wasn't having it. She wasted no time pointing an accusatory finger at the guy outside. "You can't let some stranger talk you into late-night runs, Melissa." It struck me like a bolt of lightning. Melissa shrank a little before her mom's fierce gaze. I could see the conflict dance in her eyes, loyalty to her upbringing versus the newfound freedom she was still testing out. What was I supposed to do? I stood there, feeling like a spectator to a complex play where the spoilers had all been handed out, but I was still in the audience. It felt all too familiar, this crossroad between childhood and adult independence. "I think you should apologize," her mom continued, her voice strained yet firm, but I observed a flicker of uncertainty in Melissa's eyes. The lessons learnt came rushing back to me, and I found myself taking a slow breath. I couldn't intervene directly, that would only throw fuel on the fire, but I wanted to help, to be part of her process of establishing that line she needed, just like I was doing for myself. "Or maybe we're both allowed to navigate our own choices, Mom?" I found myself saying, my heart racing. It felt awkward to speak up but somehow necessary. The tension in the air turned thick as her mom's expression shifted sharply in my direction, sudden recognition. "You too, huh? What a fun way to confuse the adults." She huffed, a mixture of frustration and disbelief intermingling in her expression. But there was something more, maybe an inkling of understanding that she wasn't the only one learning here. And just like that, I felt Melissa at my side, her posture straightening ever so slightly, emboldened to confront this moment. That nothingness between all of us had shifted, and as we stood there, I sensed the space for a dialogue, a chance to redefine it rather than simply acquiesce. All I could think was how beautifully human it was to navigate those turbulent waters together. As the conversation pivoted slowly but surely, it felt less like a scolding and more like a chance for both Melissa and her mom to meet halfway. The anxiety washed away, leaving behind a glimmer of hope for growth. Later that night, we returned home, our bags of supplies in tow. Melissa turned to me, beaming. "That was kind of you, by the way." I shrugged it off. But inside, I felt a swell of pride. I figured it had taken more than a knock at my door to find that balance, but wasn't that the real point? And as I settled on the couch again, wrapped in a familiar blanket, I recognized that sometimes life does require navigating a complex dance between assertiveness and empathy. Even if no one got the perfect score, we were all learning together, step by awkward step. As I settled into that well-worn couch, the remnants of our chaotic evening danced in my mind like strobe lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, "THX for being cool today. Want to finish that movie?" I glanced at the clock, midnight, but the couch was calling me. I tapped back, absolutely, feeling a warmth in my chest that relaxed the tension from earlier. I couldn't help but smile. The door incident had transformed from an awkward moment into something almost bonding. Melissa had a way of making even the most uncomfortable situations seem light. As she walked back into the room, tossing her hair over her shoulder and plopping down next to me, I felt grateful for her presence. We fired up the movie, but my mind kept wandering back to that knock on the door. What if I'd reacted differently? I could have stood my ground, thrown a snarky comment back at her mom. Yet, something in me knew that wouldn't have ended well. It's funny how an impulsive night can morph into a reflective conversation. Between whirs of the DVD player and the intimate glow of the TV, I pondered our little family of sorts, this quirky motley crew we had become. As the movie played, I peeked over at Melissa, who was completely absorbed in the film. I used to think of her as just a roommate, but through shared moments like these, she had become something deeper, a friend. I realized maybe we were all a bit like that, a collection of awkward encounters stitched together by our attempts to understand each other. Halfway through the film, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face dropping slightly. That flutter of concern pulled me out of the fictional world we'd trapped ourselves in. "It's my mom," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I'd better take this." I nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of protectiveness wash over me. I didn't want any more drama tonight. I listened to her side of the conversation, the commendable sonorous tone she adopted to reassure her mom. A few minutes later, she returned, her smile forced. "Just a little concerned about me, you know how it is." "But I told her I'm fine," she added, her expression softening. We settled back into our movie, but I could tell it affected her. "Do you ever feel like you have to keep convincing people you're okay, even when you're perfectly fine?" I asked, trying to understand the weight of her burden. Melissa glanced at me, her eyes dancing with surprise. "All the time. It's exhausting, especially when you're just trying to enjoy life." We shared a silence, each lost in our thoughts, resonating in the unspoken understanding of what it meant to live under the expectations of others. After what felt like an eternity wrapped in our shared silences, she finally muttered, "Thanks for being chill today. It means a lot now." "Yeah, well, some days I stumble less than others," I replied with a hint of laughter, hoping to lighten the mood as the movie credits began to roll. The laughter felt comforting, a reminder of why I cherished these moments, even those tempered by uncomfortable knocks on the door. After the movie ended, we fell into our usual routine of chatting about the plot and debating character choices, but beneath that light-hearted conversation lingered a seriousness. I could sense the flickers of realization in the air, that we were learning how to coexist, showing consideration for each other's vulnerabilities while carving out our spaces. The night wore on, the world outside growing quiet, but inside our apartment, life pulsed with potential and vulnerability, reminding me that this space belonged to all of us. The lessons we absorbed weren't just individual, they were shared, and we were better for it. I mused on this balance we were gradually discovering, an intricate dance, and perhaps that constant, uneasy rhythm was what made life richer. As I nestled deeper into my blanket, the shadows of our earlier chaos turned to whispers of understanding. Sure, boundaries and respect were important, but what really mattered was the effort to bridge those gaps. Reflecting on our interactions, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about what tomorrow would bring, knowing that in our struggles to meet in the middle, we found something profoundly human: connection. I drifted off, the faint sounds of laughter lingering in my ears, hopeful for whatever adventures lay ahead. I still remember the moment everything changed, the day I sat on my bed, scrolling through Instagram, when my mom knocked on my door. The look on her face told me this wasn't going to be a simple chat about dinner or my plans for the weekend. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice smaller than I remembered. Instinctively, I felt my heart sink, and I gestured for her to sit beside me. I had no idea that the next few minutes would thrust me into a moral quandary that would shake my already wavering sense of loyalty to my family. Mom had been trying to hide her debt problem for a while, and though I suspected something was off as I watched her tense up during calls with bill collectors, it was still a jolt to hear her say it aloud, "I can't keep up with the payments anymore." Suddenly, my hard-earned college fund, something I had been saving for years, became the focal point of our conversation. "I need your help," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I felt a rush of love and a twinge of resentment. Honestly, it felt like I was being pulled into a whirlpool of guilt. I was just starting to map out my future, a future that I'd worked so hard for, fueled by the long hours at my part-time job and the sacrifices I made to save every penny. "Mom, my college fund is for my education," I stammered, trying to regain my composure. "It's not like I can just give it away." The room was thick with silence, and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. It felt like a betrayal not just of my own dreams but of my own commitment to my future. I watched her face collapse, the mask of strength crumbling away to reveal the panic and desperation of a single parent. I admired her for standing up for us when things got tough, but I couldn't ignore that gnawing anxiety in my chest. Anxiety mixed with anger. Why didn't she reach out for help sooner? Doesn't a parent owe it to their kid to maintain stability for them? I didn't want to be selfish, but how could I compromise everything I wanted for what felt like a cycle of financial instability? I found myself replaying the moment over and over in my head, and each time, I felt that tug of war between love for my mom and my goals for myself. With time, I ultimately decided to turn her down. "I'm sorry, but I just can't do that," I said softly, shaking my head. The disappointment in her eyes left a cavern of regret in my stomach. The next few weeks felt heavy as silence filled our house, each day a reminder of my choice, a choice that felt a bit like tearing the fabric of our relationship. I immersed myself in my studies, trying to escape the tension, but those moments, her hopeful glance when I mentioned potential scholarships or her wistful comments about my college dreams, pierced through my efforts to keep both our worlds separate. As the months went by, our interactions became strained. "Dad, who was more of a distant memory than a frequent presence, made things even murkier. He called one evening to check on us and inadvertently added fuel to the fire. "Your mother is just being stubborn," he said gruffly, dismissing her concerns. That small comment unleashed a tide of rage within me, forcing me to confront the reality that this wasn't just about money, it was about a family struggling to hold together the fragments of a life that hadn't turned out the way we all hoped. I started questioning everything, my choices, my future, even my feelings toward my mom. Was I the selfish kid who turned her back in a time of need? Or was I justified in protecting my dreams? Months later, around the time of my acceptance letters, I found myself seated at the kitchen table across from her, a stack of unopened envelopes piled between us. I got in, my voice was flat, lacking the excitement I should have felt. Instead of celebrating, we sat there as if burdened by unspoken words. Rather than the jubilant moment I imagined, it became a reminder of all that lay between us. "What are you going to do?" she asked, but it was more of a whisper, her vulnerability mirrored by her expression. I had an idea, a small flicker of hope amidst this despair, but I hesitated. "I want to go," I finally confessed, "but maybe I could help you with some of the bills. Just a little." For the first time, I saw a glimmer of pride in her eyes, mixed with the weariness of a mother who had already given so much. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it certainly didn't fix everything, but it was a start, a bridge on the shaky ground between us. I may have refused to give up my college fund, but in that moment, I chose to stand by her in a different way. I think, ultimately, we are all a mix of selfishness and selflessness, navigating the complexities of family and responsibility. I still don't know if I was the asshole or if I made the right choice, but I hold on to the belief that love, in its strangest forms, can sometimes redefine our paths in life. As I sit here now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realize that this story isn't just about money or a college fund. It's about understanding that sometimes, saying no doesn't mean you don't care, it means you're trying to find a way to care for each other, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. I remember the day it happened as if it were yesterday. My phone buzzed incessantly, that annoying ringtone piercing the stillness of my afternoon. I picked it up, expecting a text from my best friend about a new series we'd been binging, but it was my mom. Just a few words at first. "Can we talk?" "Important." My stomach sank. Mom rarely asked to talk like that unless it was about something serious. I thought about the countless times I had mentally prepared myself to take on heavier burdens, but what she had to say caught me off guard. Sitting at my desk, surrounded by textbooks and half-finished assignments, I felt that familiar knot forming in my chest. When I called her back, her voice trembled. "I've been trying to figure things out with the bills, honey," she started, hesitating as if the words were hard to muster. I sensed where this was going, yet a part of me clung to hope. Maybe she just needed a little guidance, or there was a new job opportunity. But no, it was worse. She laid it all out, the debts, the missed payments, looming financial crises. I caught my breath at her mention of your college fund as though it were a mere line item on a spreadsheet, not the foundation of my future. I'd spent years planning, dreaming, hoping to leverage that tiny fund into something bigger. My heart raced with a mix of fear and anger, a swirling storm of emotions. Her voice softened as she continued, "I know it's a lot to ask, but I really need your help." I could almost visualize her, sitting in the dim light of our cramped living room, looking smaller than I remembered, trapped in a relentless cycle of regret. As guilt washed over me, I wanted to scream that she had promised me a better future, one she had dreamed for both of us. Yet the thought of abandonment also loomed large in my mind. After all, she had sacrificed so much for me. I couldn't just turn my back on her, but the thought of handing over my hard-working college savings twisted at my insides. Days passed, but the conversation lingered like an uninvited guest. I spoke to friends, tried to convince myself what the right choice was, but their well-meaning advice didn't help. "You're not an asshole for wanting a future for yourself," they'd say. Still, their words felt distant, hollow almost. I spent restless nights tossing and turning, images of my mother's face mixing with visions of my college dreams. I didn't want to be the villain in this story, nor did I want to sacrifice my aspirations to become a martyr. The night before our final conversation loomed over me, heavy and suffocating. I knew I couldn't keep swaying in indecision forever, the fear of making the wrong choice gnawed at me. That evening, I approached her, feeling dread ripple through my body. "I can't give up my college fund, Mom. It's my future, my chance to break away from everything we've been through." Her eyes, those deep wells of emotion, held disbelief tinged with hurt, but I saw a glimpse of understanding there too. Perhaps she recognized the struggle in my heart, the battle of wanting to support her while needing to build my life. After a silence that felt like an eternity, she finally nodded. I see. It's your choice to make, and I don't want to take that from you. I watched her retreat into her thoughts, the weight of this decision settling heavily between us, both of us unsure of how to navigate the aftermath. As I reflect now, unsure if I did the right thing, the sunset seems to echo my internal struggle, the radiant colors a reminder that endings can also be beautiful beginnings. I can't say if I'll ever shake that sense of guilt, wondering if love and sacrifice can ever truly coexist without tearing one apart. A few months later, after diligently working part-time and focusing on my classes, I noticed a change in my mother. Instead of spending sleepless nights worrying over debts, she started taking control, searching for new jobs, attending workshops, connecting with others who could elevate her career. It was slow, but I could see hope creeping back into her life. In moments of doubt, I found myself revisiting that conversation, how it unfolded and morphed into something unforeseen. I learned that even in moments laden with tension, there is a possibility for growth, for both my mother and me. Realizing that love manifests differently for each of us gives me solace. What we desire can shift, turn, and evolve, just as we do. So no, I may never stop wondering if perhaps I was the asshole back then, but I'm slowly starting to understand that sometimes aligning our hearts means making the hardest calls, with hands trembling and voices faltering, but never without love. In the weeks that followed my decision, life felt strangely muted. The air in our home thickened with unspoken words and unshed tears, a heavy blanket that wrapped around us as we tried to navigate this new, uncertain space. I kept my distance, mostly retreating to the small room I'd claimed as my sanctuary, where posters of my favorite bands clashed with textbooks filled with dreams I still held tightly. Each night, I would lay there, staring at the ceiling, running my fingers over the hard spine of my college fund savings account, my heart as heavy as it was when I turned my mother down. One evening, she knocked on my door. It was tentative, almost as if she were afraid to disrupt the fragile silence that had fallen between us. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I wanted to re-enter the conversation. But knowing that we couldn't just let the air sit stagnant, I nodded, pushing the door open wider. She stepped inside, her face drawn and weary, the weight of her financial burdens etched across her brow. "Can we talk?" she said, perching on the edge of my desk, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I could see the flicker of hurt in her eyes, the remnants of our last conversation still haunting her. "I've been thinking about what you said." Her voice trailed off as she glanced around my room, her gaze landing on the faded photographs of happier times, memories that felt almost foreign now. I waited, my heart racing, unsure if I was ready to hear her feelings, or if I even wanted to relive that emotional chaos. It felt as though we were balancing on the precipice. One slip could send us tumbling down into anger or resentment. I don't want you to think that I blame you," she finally continued, the words spilling out like drops of rain in a sudden storm. I was scared. Scared of losing the only thing that's been constant for me. I felt tears pricking my eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean to make things worse. I have to think about my future too. I know it's selfish but, no," she cut in firmly, a new kind of resolve sparking in her tone. "It's not selfish to want better for yourself. I realize that now. I've been struggling for so long, and I projected it all onto you. I shouldn't have. It's my debt, my choices. And while I would give anything to have my own college fund, I realize now that I can't force you to carry the burden of my mistakes. You deserve to have your path, and I need to find my way through this without dragging you down." The raw honesty in her words washed over me like a bomb. I hadn't expected this, didn't anticipate that our roles might shift in this way. I hadn't realized she hadn't seen me as just her child, but as a vessel to salvage her dreams. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, letting the weight of our conversation settle between us like a fragile truce. I saw her vulnerability, but I also recognized my own fear mirrored back at me, the fear of failing to live up to the dreams we both held. "Maybe we both need to start over," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "We can face this together, but not on my shoulders alone. You have to let me pursue what I want." A flicker of hope lit her eyes, and in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't just about the money, it was about rebuilding trust, redefining love, and understanding what it meant to stand together while acknowledging the burden each of us had been carrying. It was about recognizing that love can be fierce and protective but also gentle enough to create space for both of us to breathe. Gradually, our conversations began to change, morphing into something more profound than we'd imagined. We talked about her debts honestly, about the job she was thinking of pursuing, about how budgeting wasn't just a punishment but a chance for rebirth. I shared my aspirations too, the things I wanted to study, and the dreams I held tightly inside. With every word, we moved closer back to each other, each moment stitching up the frayed edges of our relationship. As I write this, months later, I can finally acknowledge that I never stopped wondering if I was the asshole. Perhaps I was at one point, but I was also a daughter trying to carve out her own life amid chaos. And isn't that what love asks of us? To hold both our dreams and our loved ones' dreams in the balance, even when it threatens to tear us apart? I still don't have all the answers, but every day feels like a chance to learn, to grow. I'm working on my future while watching my mother fight for hers, an unexpected team navigating the complexities of life with newfound respect. Sometimes, saying no opens the gateway to saying yes, to ourselves, and to the hope of brighter tomorrows. I never thought I would find myself in a situation where I'd have to question my friendship with Jenna, but here we are. It all started innocently enough. We met in college, two awkward freshmen navigating the maze of dorm life together. Our friendship flourished as we shared late-night study sessions fueled by pizza and too many energy drinks, laughably bonding over our failed attempts at dating. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. I started throwing small get-togethers, just 8 or 10 of us, mostly to celebrate milestones like birthdays or just the fact that it was Friday. But there was something about Jenna's attendance at these parties that began to weigh on my mind. She would show up, of course, always dressed to the nines, charming the other guests with her vivacious energy. But as the night wore on, there was a familiar script. She'd monopolize conversations, drifting from one group to another, leaving a wake of uneasy tension. I'd try to steer her away from making crass jokes about our friends, and more than once, I found myself making half-hearted excuses to distance myself from her antics. It reached a point where I dreaded sending out those invites, knowing that Jenna would show up and overshadow everything with her loud laughter, often aimed at jabs that didn't sit well with anyone. One evening, after another party where I spent too much time apologizing for her behavior, I finally broke down. I texted her, a decision that felt monumental, a mix of fear and relief swirling in my stomach. "Hey, I think I need to take a step back from inviting you to parties. It's just hard to manage things when you're there." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing as I waited for her response. The 3 bubbles floated for what felt like an eternity before her message came back, sharp and cold. "Wow. I can't believe you'd say that." I felt this strange mixture of guilt and empowerment flood through me. Was I the asshole for wanting to reclaim my space, my friendships, my peace of mind? The days that followed were awkward. I avoided larger friend groups fearing that the conversation would come back to Jenna, and I tiptoed around mutual friends who seemed torn between us. Jenna didn't reach out. It felt like I'd taken a match to a bridge I didn't want to burn but had no choice in doing so. But then, one night, I received a simple text from a mutual friend. She was wondering if I wanted to grab coffee. I hesitated at first, but curiosity won me over. Over steaming mugs, she shared Jenna's side. Apparently, Jenna felt isolated and hurt, convinced that everyone loved her except me. I hadn't noticed she'd been going through some personal stuff, and all the over-the-top antics had been an attempt to mask her vulnerability. I felt a pang of regret, mixed with the thought that maybe I hadn't handled the situation in the best way. I reached out to Jenna, just an olive branch of sorts, keeping it light, suggesting we go out for drinks and talk. The conversation was awkward, yet as we spoke, I realized we both had missed the mark with each other. I shared my perspective, and she showed me hers. Looking back, I'm still not sure if I was entirely in the right or if I was actually being an asshole. I learned that sometimes friendships require deeper conversations and understanding instead of ultimatums. We've been trying to rebuild a foundation, one conversation at a time, hopefully forging a new path forward with a little more grace and a lot more empathy. I remember the first time we truly sat down to talk, the clink of ice in our glasses echoing in the small booth wedged against the back wall of that bar. It felt almost surreal, like characters in a movie on the brink of reconciliation. I could sense the tension weaving between us, a taut string just waiting to snap under the weight of our histories and miscommunications. She looked different in the dim bar light, her usually guarded expression softened by the flickering candle between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the emotional tug-of-war ahead. "I just didn't see it coming," I said, hoping my words would take root in a space where we could finally meet in the middle. Every party I threw, you seemed withdrawn. I could feel my excitement dimming when I saw you on the edge of the crowd, not really engaging with anyone. She leaned back, visibly grappling with my words. Well, you never asked me how I felt about it, did you? Her voice had that familiar, soft edge of vulnerability that I'd come to recognize, a hint of frustration layered within. It felt like you were trying to appease the group, and I was just part of the decoration. I frowned at her choice of word, decoration. Without thinking, I blurted, I didn't mean to treat you like an accessory. I noticed a flicker of hurt flash across her face, and I quickly backtracked. I just thought we were going through the motions together. I wanted to share good times, she sighed deeply, fingers tracing the condensation pooling on her glass. I see that now. But sometimes, it felt like you were more interested in being the host than being my friend, like you needed a perfect party, and I was just an extra. Those words hit hard. I wanted to argue, to insist that my intentions had been true, but I paused, allowing her feelings to seep in. It dawned on me that maybe I had been so focused on creating the perfect social atmosphere that I'd lost sight of what really mattered, connection. The conversation rolled into the night, bouncing between minor grievances and heartfelt sentiments, the awkwardness gradually giving way to genuine understanding. I learned how she viewed our friendship, the highs and lows she felt in the backdrop of my social life. Between laughter and serious revelations, there was a palpable sense of repair in the air. It wasn't perfect, there were still silences that hung like clouds, full of unsaid things, and sometimes the guilt would eat away at me when I thought of those evenings where her laughter felt distant. Yet, as the hours passed, I felt something shift. We weren't where we had been before, but maybe we didn't have to be. The next few months were a delicate dance of rebuilding, peppered with coffee dates and book exchanges instead of parties. Our conversations deepened, touching not just on the light topics but on dreams, failures, and everything in between. I remember one late afternoon, sitting in a cafe where the sunlight danced on the floor like an old friend, she confessed she struggled with vulnerability. I matched her honesty by admitting that I had a habit of ghosting the deeper emotions, preferring to sidestep anything that felt too heavy or complicated. It was in those moments of shared truth that I started to see that my approach could be problematic, stunted. No more half-hearted invites to gatherings and overlooking how her absence echoed in my life. I committed to including her, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to nurture our relationship. Still, I couldn't shake that lingering question from our first talk. Was I the asshole for needing to set boundaries, or was it my fault for not recognizing the friendship was fraying? Perhaps it was a bit of both, a complex tapestry woven with missteps and misunderstandings. Ultimately, it was clear that the journey to mend our friendship was more about understanding than assigning blame. And while I didn't know where we might end up, the path forward felt much clearer each time we shared a moment together, each new memory a building block towards something stronger. So here we are, navigating this space with more grace and empathy, discovering that perhaps the true test of friendship isn't in our moments of success but the nuances of our failures, learning to forgive not just each other but ourselves, one conversation at a time. One of those pivotal moments came just a week later, after an unexpectedly rainy Saturday kept me cooped up at home. I had just settled onto my couch, a pile of takeout boxes littering the coffee table, when my phone buzzed with a text from Jess. Want to take a walk? I have something to talk about. My stomach flipped. I didn't want to overanalyze the invitation, but instinctively I knew that this wasn't just about a stroll in our favorite park. I felt both apprehension and a tingling sense of hope as I replied with a simple, sure. Just give me a few. As we walked side by side, the clouds hanging low above us, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and new beginnings, Jess broke the silence first. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I realized I've been so focused on feeling excluded that I didn't see how my actions contributed to the mess we found ourselves in. The sincerity in her voice pierced through the tension that had lingered between us since our last heart-to-heart. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a weight lift just from her honesty. Yeah, and for me, it was about feeling unheard, like my frustrations didn't matter. It wasn't about the parties, but about feeling like my feelings were being brushed off. I guess I was tired of making excuses for why I needed boundaries. The words spilled from me, as if I was finally allowing myself to breathe and let the air of vulnerability flow freely between us. I never wanted you to feel left out, but it feels like every time I extended an invitation, you were going through your own thing. I didn't know how to reach you. Jess nodded solemnly, her brow furrowing in thought. I see that now. I was dealing with my own issues, stress at work, family stuff, but I didn't realize I was shutting you out. I thought I was protecting myself, you know? There was a pause as we stopped beneath the swaying branches of an old oak tree. The wind rustled its leaves, mirroring the turbulence of our unresolved emotions. I missed you, I really did, she continued, her voice softer now, more delicate, like the moment itself. I guess I just didn't know how to reach out without feeling ashamed. I took a deep breath, feeling the sincerity of her words wrapping around my heart like a hug. We're in this together, Jess. I don't want you to feel ashamed of needing space. But we have to communicate, stop dancing around issues. We owe each other the honesty, even when it feels uncomfortable. Armed with a new mutual understanding, we began to talk more openly about our expectations. Sure, there were discussions about plans, but also about our emotional landscapes, our worries, and dreams. We started meeting not just during events in the community but for the little things, coffee on lazy Sundays, movie nights where we'd laugh over outdated films, moments that glimmered brighter than any party we had ever hosted. The rebuilding wasn't smooth, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. Sometimes we'd slip back into old habits, forgetting to check in with each other. But with each misstep, each awkward text or accidental silence, we would remind ourselves that growth isn't a straight line. It's more of a sprawling web of mistakes and little triumphs, golden threads weaving us tighter. Months passed, and while our friendship wasn't wholly restored, it felt reborn, like a flower stubbornly blooming through asphalt, resilient and beautiful. I realized that it was okay not to have all the answers, to not put an official label on our bond just yet. What mattered was the journey we navigated together, filled with more understanding. And even in silence, we were learning to be okay. One day, at a small gathering at another friend's house, I caught Jess's eye across the crowded room. She raised her glass, a smile blooming on her face. That simple gesture felt monumental, like we had said so much without uttering a single word. Looking back now, I think about the precarious balance of friendships and how vulnerability, when shared, can create something beautiful from chaos. Sometimes, all it takes to mend a frayed connection is acknowledging our imperfections and extending the grace to learn together. And as I stand on this winding path, uncertain of where it leads, I feel a new sense of resilience alongside Jess, a promise that we would continue to navigate the hard conversations, weaving our laughter and heartaches into the intricate tapestry of our friendship one day at a time. I remember the night my partner, Alex, casually dropped a bombshell on me over dinner. We were sitting at our little wooden table, the kind that wobbles unless you balance it just right with a stack of magazines. The room was filled with the rich scent of garlic and rosemary. I just whipped up a hearty risotto, something I often made because cooking grounded me, gave me joy. In between bites, Alex looked at me with that look, intense and a bit nervous. So, I was thinking. How about we get you a new kitchen setup? Like, a really fancy one. Maybe even a new stove? My heart sank a bit. Thanks, but I love my current setup, I replied, trying not to sound dismissive. Alex's face fell. But I looked at induction cooktops, and this one has all these features that could really enhance your cooking. They launched into a whole spiel about the latest technology, how it could change the game for me. But what Alex didn't get was that I didn't want a shiny, expensive appliance that would take away the imperfect charm of my cooking space. I'd spent years cultivating my skills in that kitchen, and it represented more than just cookware, it was a haven. The thought of taking a gift worth over $1,000 felt like I was admitting my love for cooking wasn't genuine unless it came with a hefty price tag. It's too much, Alex. Honestly, it feels ungrateful to accept that. I like cooking as it is. I don't need a fancy setup to validate me. The silence that hung between us thickened with tension, and I could see the disappointment in their eyes. My words landed hard. I felt bad for not embracing the gift, for not wanting to let a beautiful gesture in. But part of me felt like accepting it would twist the very essence of why I loved cooking. Over the next few days, I reflected on our conversation and weighed my feelings. I knew I had to talk to Alex again. Perhaps it would have made sense if I had explained to them how I derived my motivation from the little experiences, the imperfect meals I'd crafted, the burnt garlic that reminded me of my childhood mistakes. But instead, I let fear over the value of the gift consume me, and I left it untouched on the back burner, simmering in the awkwardness. I finally sat down with Alex again, who seemed torn. They were trying to understand my reasoning while also feeling hurt by my refusal. It was tense, like standing on fragile ice, unsure of where to step next. Look, I appreciate you wanting to support my passion, but I don't want that to be tied to money. Cooking is my artistry, my therapy. Making something from scratch is worth more than any gadget. As I spoke, I felt my heart race. I could see the wheels turning in Alex's mind, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't just quelling a conflict, I was shedding light on what truly mattered to both of us. We began to discuss the deeper layers of creativity and passion in our lives, how they manifest differently in both of us. I saw Alex's expression soften, and I caught the corners of their mouth lifting ever so slightly. While we may have had different views on value and love, I knew we cared deeply for one another, and that was a gift far more precious than any appliance could ever be. I can't say it all wrapped up neatly. There's still some lingering tension around the topic, but for now, we're finding our rhythm again, and that feels like progress. Sometimes, the way you show love and the way it's received can be as complicated as any recipe. And maybe that's okay. As I settled into my chair at the kitchen table, surrounded by scents of rosemary and garlic from the roast I had left to marinate, I reflected on the strange tension that had emerged between Alex and me. Just the other day, I had found myself engrossed in my latest culinary adventure, chopping vegetables with a fierce determination, but the whole time, a cloud of unease loomed over my head. Here was my beloved partner, an amazing cook in their own right, wanting to express their love through the gift of a state-of-the-art mixer, and yet I found myself feeling boxed in rather than uplifted. "You don't trust me to create," I had said that afternoon, the words spilling out before I could catch them. I could almost see the confusion glaze over Alex's face. "It's not that at all," they replied softly, and I felt the truth in their voice, but the initial sting of their well-intentioned gift stuck with me like burnt sugar. I loved cooking, so much that I thrived on the messiness and improvisation it brought into my life. To me, cooking wasn't just about whipping up something delicious, it was a dance, an expression of my personality, and a way to weave my love for those I cared about into something tangible. But accepting that glimmering appliance felt like accepting that I couldn't do it in my own way anymore. Now, as I swept my eyes around our modest kitchen, I realized that all those mismatched utensils and pots, the faint scars on the wooden cutting board, each a small testimony to some culinary experimentation gone wrong, were more valuable to me than any countertop marvel. The lingering tension with Alex persisted in the most unexpected ways. It surfaced during our shared moments, like when I tried to chop herbs as we talked about our week. "You know, that mixer could save you time," Alex quipped, the light tone of their voice masking the seriousness I was sensing behind it. I paused, knife hovering mid-air, and turned my gaze to their face, looking for the irritation I half expected to see. Instead, they wore a soft smile, and a hint of vulnerability crept into their eyes that made my heart ache. There was love in that smile, maybe even a quiet plea for understanding. For a moment, I felt as if I stood in front of a fire that could either warm my heart or burn me entirely. I inhaled slowly, letting the fragrant air fill my lungs, and I finally asked, "But do you get it? It's not about the time, I don't need time saved. I need to feel the process, the rawness of it." And in that moment, something shifted. Alex leaned forward, resting their arms on the table, brow furrowing as they considered my words. "I think I get it," they said gently, searching for the right way to phrase what I had just shared. "Then, how do I show you love if what I thought was helpful isn't? What can I do?" I had never thought of that before. How could I guide them when I barely understood myself? It was the questions that hung heavy in the air, shaping not just that moment but the very fabric of our relationship. And while I didn't know that we would ever completely eliminate the misunderstandings that had taken root in our exchanges, I did feel a small flicker of hope. Perhaps love was less about grand gestures and more about the small conversations, the understanding that these little bumps weren't the end of the road, it was merely another twist in our ever-evolving recipe. After we finished cooking together, despite it taking longer than usual, we sat down to feast on my latest creation, and the tension began to ease. The flavors of what I made harmonized with quiet laughter as we reminisced about the silly moments we had shared along this journey. And just like that, our relationship began to simmer back to life, no grand mixer necessary. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, I found myself smiling at the reflective gleam of the stainless steel mixer on the counter, knowing it might eventually make its way into our kitchen, albeit on our terms. I realized that maybe it represented more than just a gadget, it was an opportunity for Alex to find creative freedom in their cooking, a chance for us to bond over something different. Perhaps love didn't always mean complete agreement but rather embracing our differences and weaving them into something new. I turned to Alex, who was lounging on the couch, and just like that, I felt the warmth return to the space between us. "Let's figure out ways we can cook together. I want our kitchen to feel like a partnership," I suggested. The corners of their mouth lifted into that familiar soft smile once again, and this time my heart felt lighter. I realized that maybe we didn't need to have all the answers, but we were on a journey together, and that was enough for now. The next few weeks unfolded like a delicate souffle, full of promise but requiring patience and finesse. We started small, diving into recipes that felt attainable but had just enough challenge to keep us engaged. Saturday evenings became our little ritual. We'd pull out step-by-step cookbooks, the kind that have more pictures than words. I relished the moments when I would show Alex my favorite method of chopping an onion, explaining how to get the perfect dice while trying to refrain from getting too lost in a teaching mode. Alex, in turn, introduced me to their favorite marinades, sweet and tangy concoctions that I had never considered before. It was like we were two artists experimenting with fresh colors on a canvas, each stroke adding new texture to our relationship. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. I'd catch myself slipping into my old habits, where pride reared its head and I'd insist on doing everything myself, convinced that asking for help made me weak. One night, while stirring a bubbling marinara sauce, I felt the pull in my stomach, an urge to handle everything from prep to cleanup just to prove my prowess. Alex leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me with those knowing eyes. "It doesn't have to be perfect, you know. It should just be fun," they said gently, and I felt a flush of defensiveness rise within me. Yet, just like with any dish that requires adjusting ingredients based on taste, I took a breath and swallowed my pride. "You're right," I admitted, setting the wooden spoon down. "Can you help me chop some garlic?" The light chuckle that escaped their lips was like music to my ears, dispelling the tension in the air. Together, we found a rhythm, hands moving in tandem, and I began to understand that making a meal wasn't solely about the end result, but rather the joy of the moment spent creating something together. As the aroma of our cooking filled the apartment, I noticed how laughter became a constant ingredient in our culinary experiment. We had our mishaps, a splatter of tomato sauce here, an overcooked piece of chicken there, but each blunder became a shared joke, a story to retell. One night, while we were wrestling with a particularly ambitious homemade pizza, it dawned on me how much closer we had grown through these shared experiences. With every flourish of fresh basil and sprinkle of cheese, our kitchen echoed with the laughter and chatter of two people who were no longer simply living under one roof but were beginning to build something warm together. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, the kitchen transformed. It began holding memories, not just for Alex and me, but as a testament to our evolving partnership. And though I still had moments where I felt trepidation about expressing my thoughts, I learned it was okay to be vulnerable. One evening, as we sipped wine after another cooking session, I turned to Alex and shared my fears about not being enough. "What if I'm just not good at this?" I whispered, voice barely above a murmur. Alex paused, their gaze steady and unwavering. "Don't you see? You're more than the perfect recipe. You bring so much heart to what we do. We'll figure this out, together." That night, I curled up next to Alex on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of our connection, and, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing easier. The lingering tension didn't vanish completely, it lurked like a shadow, a reminder of how different our perspectives could be. Still, we were learning how to appreciate those differences without letting them create distance. As I knocked my head back and laughed at some foolish joke we shared, it hit me, this wasn't merely about cooking or gifts but rather the exploration of what it really meant to love someone and accept their love in return. In those late-night talks after dinner, we began weaving dreams together, sharing thoughts of a small garden outside, bursting with fresh herbs to elevate our meals. I think, perhaps, we were planting the seeds of not just a garden but a life we both envisioned. And even if it wasn't perfect, maybe love, like cooking, was more about discovery, learning, and savoring every moment, a beautiful mess that somehow always managed to nourish the soul. I never thought I'd find myself standing on the deck of our Airbnb, the salty breeze tangling my hair, trying to figure out how to keep my brother-in-law away from my kids. It all started when I decided to invite my husband's family for a week at the beach. The idea was to create some lasting memories, let the kids play in the surf, and reconnect as a family. But then there was Greg, my sister-in-law's husband. He wasn't a bad guy, but he had this incessant knack for teasing the kids. It began as harmless banter, but soon his jokes turned sharp. I watched as my 6-year-old, Mia, came back to me in tears after Greg's joke about her being a slow swimmer. And then it escalated the next day when Greg pointed out that my 8-year-old son, Jake, couldn't hit a baseball to save his life, all while pretending to take a swing himself. At first, I brushed it off. Just Greg being Greg, I told myself, the mantra echoing in my head as I tried to chalk it up to some misguided humor. But as the days rolled by, I found myself anxious in his presence, hoping he wouldn't take another jab at my kids, dreading the next meltdown. We were here to have fun, not for my children to feel belittled. It all came to a head one afternoon. We were packing up a cooler for a family outing when Greg took a playful jab at Mia again, this time something about her not being able to build a sandcastle to save her life. I felt a heat rising inside me, a protective instinct sparking. "Hey, Greg," I said, my tone sharper than I intended, "if you don't stop picking on my kids, you won't be invited on the trip tomorrow." The words hung in the air, shocking everyone into silence. Greg looked taken aback, and I could feel the weight of his gaze. My sister-in-law's mouth dropped open in disbelief. The kids froze, wide-eyed, unsure how to react. I felt a rush of guilt wash over me. Was I too harsh? But then all I could see were my kids' bruised little hearts. That night, I lay awake, replaying the event over and over in my mind. Was I the jerk for stepping in? Should I have handled it differently? Maybe I could have talked to him privately, but I felt like my only choices were to protect my children or to stay silent and watch them suffer. The next day, Greg didn't come with us. He stayed back at the house, leaving a cold silence in his absence. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. The kids splashed and built sandcastles, unbothered and free, but I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I'd created a rift. Later, as we gathered for dinner, I felt the tension at the table. Greg's absence loomed large, and I braced myself for the conversation that was bound to come. My sister-in-law finally broke the silence. "You know he really meant no harm, right?" she said cautiously. "He can be a bit rough around the edges, but he loves the kids." I felt my chest tighten. Love shouldn't hurt, I thought, and that wasn't enough of a justification for me. I took a deep breath and voiced my side about the impact of his words, how they affected my kids. There was a strange moment of quiet understanding, a space where we both recognized the complexities of family dynamics. By the end of the week, Greg and I had a quiet resolution. He apologized in his own awkward fashion, a half-hearted joke, but I could see sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't perfect, but we reached a temporary peace. I left feeling like a warrior for my kids, and an uneasy truce was found among family ties. It's been a month since then, and while the trip was awkward, I think it helped all of us realize where the lines were drawn. The kids are blooming, their laughter a reminder of what family should be. But I still check in on myself. Was I too protective? AITA for trying to stand up for my children? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a sign of the protective grit that comes with being a mom. I may not have all the answers, but for now, I'll keep holding the line, even if it gets messy sometimes. Life continues to be a delicate balance, doesn't it? I never thought I would find myself reflecting so deeply on the dynamics of family, especially not after that unnerving vacation with my brother-in-law, Marco. Each day, as I watch my kids blossom into their vibrant selves, I'm reminded of how pivotal that moment was for us, how one uncomfortable confrontation shifted our family's narrative. I was always the laid-back parent, the one who encouraged my kids to express themselves, make mistakes, and learn from them. But seeing Marco constantly undercut them, his teasing slipping casually into mean-spirited jabs, flipped a switch in me. In those moments of hurt, the quiet desperation of wanting to protect my children surged forth. I realized standing up for them meant drawing boundaries, even with family, and that realization opened my eyes to a truth I had previously dismissed. Not all adults understand that their words hold weight, especially around impressionable little souls. That conflict continues to echo in my mind. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I question if I went too far. Was I too protective? A part of me wishes I could have been more diplomatic, but then the images of my children's sad little faces flash through my mind, and I feel a surge of clarity again. I can't let them believe that mockery is a form of love. My heart aches at the thought that they might think that's acceptable behavior from anyone, let alone family. We've been discussing feelings a lot lately, what makes them sad, what makes them happy, and just 2 nights ago, when my eldest, Lily, informed me with her big, inquisitive eyes that Marco's jokes don't make her feel very good, I felt the validation I needed. I didn't just protect them, I opened a door for them to voice their feelings, to confront me about their struggles, and to understand that they deserve respect. As we've shifted back to normalcy, I've noticed how the kids have adjusted. They're more confident, filling the house with giggles that rattle the windows. "Can we have dance parties again, Mom?" they chirp, eyes sparkling with glee. I chuckle at how they've commandeered the living room with vibrant arts and crafts, their artwork peppered across the refrigerator, chaotic yet beautiful splashes of color that reflect their exuberance. But underneath all that laughter, I occasionally catch a subtle hesitation when they encounter playful comments or teasing. It lingers there, a thread of their past experiences with Marco that they have yet to untangle. As for Marco, he's made an effort to check in more often post-vacation, sending messages filled with jokes that, to me, seem rehearsed. He even tried to connect with the kids over video chats, asking them silly riddles they just rolled their eyes at, but they let him. They understand it's an olive branch of sorts. It feels awkward but hopeful, like both parties are treading on the shattered remains of boundaries restored. I am still here, a vigilant sentinel, keeping an eye on the situation, monitoring how it unfolds. My feelings continue to be a complex tapestry sewn from protective instincts, nervousness, and a deep, unwavering love for my children. I think this time around, I'll open up an honest dialogue, perhaps even share how I felt about our family dynamics in that moment of conflict. It could be uncomfortable, but isn't that what growth requires? Vulnerability often breeds understanding. Family isn't always about the perfect moments captured in photo albums, it's about navigating the messiness together and giving each other the grace to grow. So, even if our journey gets rough, I believe that as long as we're willing to confront issues, to speak about our feelings, and approach our relationships with empathy, we'll emerge stronger. But oh, what a ride it's been, learning the limits of love and protection. Maybe one day, I'll sit down with Marco, share a cup of coffee, and talk openly about stepping on toes in the name of humor and bonding. Until then, though, I will keep nurturing the life and laughter weaving through our home, aware that family means tending to the tangled relationships with a lot of heart and patience. For now, we're a work in progress, embracing the imperfections of being together and armed with the strength to keep evolving. As the month rolled on from that awkward family vacation, life began to settle into a new rhythm. I watched my kids, Felix, the 6-year-old with an imagination as vast as the sky, and Mia, my 9-year-old whose heart seemed bigger than her petite frame, blossom in ways that warmed my heart. They giggled more, flung themselves into their playdates with unabashed enthusiasm, and I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Their laughter echoed in our home, echoing reminders that joy can reign even amid the tangled threads of family dynamics. The kitchen buzzed with life, it became our sanctuary. The aroma of fresh cookie dough and the sound of Felix's spaceship adventures filled every nook. I snuck peeks at Mia as she crafted her latest masterpiece, a rainbow drawing that had multiple family members within colorful stick figures, each one labeled by name like they were some kind of comic character. It struck me just how resilient kids can be, how they adapt and thrive, but it also made me hyper-aware of the fragility of that resilience in the face of hurtful antics. After that vacation, Marco still had a way of trying to be the funny guy, but I noticed a softer approach. He'd tone it down noticeably, his need for laughs taking second place to keeping the peace with me and the kids. I found solace in this reset. Then one day, as I stood at the threshold of the living room, my heart swelled at the sight of my children playing a game of cards with Marco. They were bent over the table, exchanging stories through shouts and giggles, and for a moment, the past tensions felt like a distant memory. Still, the cautious mom in me remained vigilant. One afternoon, Marco called to chat. It was curious how easily we fell back into the ebb and flow of conversation, the casual banter of family. You know, he started, I've been thinking about how I joke with the kids. There was hesitance in his voice, a tentative honesty that made my heart soften. I didn't mean to cross any lines. I thought it was all in good fun. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around my mug, hot steam wafting toward my face. I know you didn't. But humor is a tricky thing, especially when it can feel so personal. Kids have a way of wearing their hearts on their sleeves, and I think sometimes they don't see the bigger picture in jokes. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing my words. Yeah. I get that. I guess I've been learning that just being an uncle isn't just about the fun and games. It's about being someone they can rely on too. I could hear the sincerity in his tone, and it felt refreshing. We ended our conversation with an unspoken understanding, the kind that lingers in the air long after the words have been said. It was a step forward, albeit a small one, like a cautious baby taking its first steps. That weekend, we hosted a family barbecue, the kind filled with laughter, sizzling burgers, and kids darting through the yard as they played tag. Marco was there, ready as ever to delve into games with Felix, which he did with a newfound gentleness. When Mia proudly showcased the drawings she created in art class, he knelt down, genuinely interested. Is that me? He asked, carefully pointing to a stick figure that had spiky hair and a wide grin. It struck me how, right then, there was a bridge forming between them, an unintentional bond shaped by respect rather than humor. In that moment, I realized that building a family isn't about perfection but about navigating the chaos together. As the evening wound down and dusk dipped its fingers across the sky, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. My children were thriving, Marco was evolving, and I was learning to let go just a little bit, trusting that our relationships could be nurtured rather than forced. Perhaps that was the real lesson. We're all imperfect, bumping against each other, yet it's in this beautifully chaotic dance where the most profound growth occurs. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I pressed a kiss against their foreheads, my heart swelling with gratitude for the messy, vibrant tapestry of family life. I may not have all the answers, but a sense of hope lingered in the air, a blossoming understanding that we're all doing our best, one day at a time. You wouldn't think something as simple as a horse could cause a rift in a family, but here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the vet bill that's become a symbol of all the chaos. I never imagined that dealing with my two beloved Arabians, Bella and Zeus, would lead to me sending an invoice to my little sister, Liv. It all started when she turned 16 and, in a burst of teenage whimsy, decided she could help me with my horses. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind that lulls you into a sense of easy comfort, when Liv bounded into the barn, her ponytail bouncing behind her. I was mucking out the stalls, the earthy smell of hay and a hint of manure filling the air, when I heard her excited voice cutting through my thoughts. "Can I bring my friends over to see Bella and Zeus?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with possibility. "Sure," I replied, though I secretly wondered why she thought her friends would care about horses. A couple of hours later, a gaggle of giggling girls squeezed into the barn, each one more enthusiastic than the last. They fed the horses treats, petted them, and eventually, much to my horror, began scheming about breeding. I tried to interject, reminding them all that it wasn't just a game. "Breeding is a big deal, Liv," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. "It's not just about having cute foals." But she brushed me off, somehow convinced it would be a fun adventure. It was a naive, childish thought, and I didn't really think she would pursue anything further. But I should have known better. A few days passed, and one evening, I strolled out to check on Bella and Zeus only to find Liv and her friends unsupervised in the pasture. The horses were separated by a flimsy fence, and Liv stood in the center, hands on her hips, gesturing animatedly. I felt a pit in my stomach as I rushed over. "What on earth are you doing?" I nearly shouted, my heart racing. Liv grinned. "Zeus and Bella are going to have a baby," she declared, her eyes wide with excitement. "I let them out together." The realization hit me hard. What if they actually tried to mate? My mind spun with scenarios. Sure, Zeus was gelded, but my sister clearly didn't understand the implications of what she had done. I could feel every muscle in my body tense as I ushered her friends out, grounding myself in the moment, but inside, a storm was brewing. Sure enough, the next morning, Bella had a minor injury from the chaotic encounter. I watched them both for days, my anxiety gnawing at me, before finally taking them to the vet. The bill was astronomical, and as I stared at the figures, I felt my love for my sister turn into frustration. I scrawled an invoice of my own, detailing the unnecessary vet expenses. The hesitation was brutal. Do I really send this to my sister? After a sleepless night and a barrage of self-reflection, I hit send. I thought I'd feel a rush of relief, but instead, dread washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. When she received it, the silence was deafening. I waited, heart thudding, bracing for the fallout. Liv finally responded with tears, accusing me of being a heartless sister. I felt sick. All I had wanted was to protect my horses and prevent any future mishaps. But in my quest for retribution, I felt I'd maybe soured the bond between us. It took days of barely speaking to each other before we could even sit down and hash it out. We both cried, she apologized for being reckless, and I confessed how much the whole ordeal had shaken me. We came to an understanding. She would look after Bella and Zeus, and I would be more patient. It all felt surreal, almost haunting, how a simple mishap turned a common Saturday into this ping-pong of emotions. I realized that while I might have been justified in my feelings of frustration, I could have handled it with a bit more grace. As I sit here now, sipping a cup of tea, looking out at the pasture, Liv is out there with the horses, brushing them with a focus I hadn't noticed before. Maybe we both learned something, after all. Life with family isn't easy, and it's definitely a balancing act. As for the vet bill, I now simply consider it an investment in understanding each other better, a reminder that family, like horses, might need a bit more guidance to grow. I find myself smiling as I watch Liv, a little focused whirlwind in that wide expanse of green, her tangles of hair whipping around her face in the breeze. It's almost humorous how she can draw those horses into her orbit, they seem to respond to her presence. I remember the chaos of last week, the shock flaring through my entire body when I discovered her near my barn, attempting to corral my stallion, Duke, and my mare, Bella, for what she thought was a matchmaking session. It felt like she was going to be the next horse whisperer, but in reality, she was just an enthusiastic 11-year-old trying to play God, completely oblivious to the risks involved. The whole scene flashed through my mind, Liv's pleading eyes as she assured me it was just a harmless idea. Just because she was my little sister didn't mean I wouldn't worry about the potential damage, physical and emotional, those horses could incur. When the vet bill arrived, I hesitated, anger pulling in my gut. I should have been understanding. After all, horse breeding felt so foreign to Liv, yet she approached it with this wild imagination that I once had, 2 decades ago. But that day, in the midst of my frustrations and my concerns crashing together, my practicality took over. I sent her the bill with a curt message, a small gesture that felt justified in the moment. Later, though, when I saw her face fall as she read my text, a crumbling hurt that matched the weight in my chest, I regretted my approach. The tension between us grew, a lingering small storm in a family that had always prided ourselves on unity. Watching her now, though, I realize how quickly that storm can quiet. Like a big gray cloud dissolving into sunlight. We've both had our moments, haven't we? I suppose family isn't always about being right, it's about learning how to navigate missteps together. As Liv pauses, resting her head against Bella's neck, I see that her love for horses runs deep. She isn't out there to craft experiments but to bond with creatures that can teach us about trust and kindness. And just like that, with every brushstroke, I can feel the tension washing away, moving not only through her but through me. I think about bringing it up, the bill, how I've learned to communicate better, maybe even apologizing for my reaction, but I realize this quiet moment may speak louder than any words. Living with her, sharing these valleys of mistakes and growth, was more rewarding than I'd ever allowed myself to appreciate before. With a deeper resolve in my heart, I decide to keep our dialogue open, to be patient with her and myself as we navigate our own learning curves together. I take another sip of my tea, watching the scene before me, and I find peace in knowing that perhaps that vet bill wasn't just a cost but a bridge that had invited us closer to each other, showing that the things that strain us can also shape us. As I sat there, watching Liv methodically brush each horse with tender strokes, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity wash over me. The sun kissed the horizon, casting warm hues over the pasture and illuminating the imperfections on our little homestead. Each broken fence post, each patch of wildflowers spilling over the edges reminded me that life itself isn't meant to be immaculate. I took another slow sip of my tea, letting its warmth seep through my fingers. It wasn't just about the vet bill anymore, it was about the lessons we often overlook when wrapped up in our frustrations. Liv might not have understood the intricacies of horse breeding, and I was once that naive too, chasing dreams with little comprehension of the weight they carried. Maybe her audacity came from a place of wonder, in wanting to connect with the horses the same way I did, a desire for closeness that I hadn't acknowledged until now. I remembered how I used to climb onto my childhood pony without a thought, dreaming of galloping free, completely unbothered by the complexities that came as we got older. The image of my little sister, wide-eyed and hopeful, trying to orchestrate her own version of magic between the horses tugged at my heartstrings. I thought of our conversations, the times we'd spoken past each other over petty squabbles. A breath of fresh air settled into my thoughts. Perhaps I had been too harsh, too quick to defend the reputation of my horses rather than embrace the sincerity of her intentions. The realization hit me that I had inadvertently shrouded her curiosity with anger, turning her unassuming questions into something heavy and laden with guilt. Watching her now, I noticed the way her lips curled gently, humming a tuneless song as she brushed. There was a quiet joy to that moment, a reminder of the innocence we often forget in this busy world. As she finished with one horse, she turned, and I caught her eye. For a moment, we exchanged an understanding smile, one that resonated louder than the silent echoes of our past miscommunications. I decided then that the time had come to change the narrative between us. After she finished with the horses, I set my tea down, absorbing the tranquility of the moment, and called out to her. "Hey Liv, wanna help me with the draft horses feed?" I asked, my voice light, inviting. There was a pause, a flicker of uncertainty in her eye, but then she nodded and brushed off her hands as she made her way over, that same spark of determination lighting her features. As we worked side by side, stirring the grains and chatting about the horse's behaviors, I felt the tension ease like a breeze clearing the winter air. It was in those simple exchanges, the laughter we shared while doing something mundane, that I learned how quickly we could bridge gaps with understanding. The vet bill, rather than the anchor weighing us down, had transformed into a compass, guiding us toward forging this newfound bond. Later that evening, as the stars began to twinkle against the twilight sky, I felt a soft warmth in my heart, a sense that we were finally on a journey together rather than as rivals in each other's lives. I wanted to hug her, to tell her how proud I was of her, and though it felt a little lopsided, I resolved to start anew. We were already plotting ways to improve the barn together, talking about equestrian lessons, the projects we could take on, and a possible trip to the local horse show next summer. Who knew Liv's venture into the world of horses could bloom into something so beautiful if only we kept nurturing it with patience and compassion. As I lay in bed that night, the sound of content horses softly neighing in the distance, I realized that family, like a good horse, might need trust, room to breathe, and a little grace. Perhaps the challenge was never about the vet bill at all, but about allowing ourselves the space to learn, grow, and certainly, love unconditionally.